Good morning. Are you awake?
Yeah.
Well, congratulations appreciate you being here at such an early time, especially those who come from the West Coast. Thanks for being here. Obviously, cybersecurity is an important enough subject. So my name is Anto Budiarjo. I'm the curator and editor of the New Deal blog, and I'm the one that kind of put this summit together. I meant to mention a few things about just the format and how we're going to run this thing. We're going to go from here, which is 7:30, all the way to 10:30 without a break. And so if you need to take a break, just do it in your own time and whatever, but just sort of feel free to have some more breakfast or drinks or whatever, but just sort of obviously be conscious that this is a small room and we're trying to have a meeting here. Right? So most of the summit here is going to be discussions. It's not actually going to be that much presentations. So we have a very large panel here of 9 people that Jim will introduce. I also organized a mic at the end there for questions and comments. If you do have any questions and comments, please just come up to the mic and then we'll acknowledge you and you can do your thing. This summit is being streamed live and it's going to be recorded, so we'll see how we can actually distribute this after the summit. And the address is actually the same URL as the information about the summit, summit.newdeal.blog. So if you're inclined to tweet while we're doing this summit, please do that, and also tweet using the hashtag #FacilityIT. Okay. So this is our agenda for this morning. I'm going to make a few comments, then I'm going to hand it over to Jim Lee, the chair of the summit, to make opening comments, and then we'll have Glenn Alberninger with a keynote discussing the relevance of cybersecurity, or the importance of cybersecurity in smart systems of the future. And then we've split up the topic, the remainder of the topic, into 4 topics. And the 4 highlighted on the screen there. State of cybersecurity, it's really about where we are now. The second one is getting into the minds of the IT department. And then talking about BACnet SC and other initiatives that's going on in the cybersecurity in the space. And then lastly, sort of a discussion about call to action. What do we do next? How do we actually make cybersecurity much more a thing in this industry? And then we'll wrap up, hopefully about 10:30. And each of those 4 topics will have a very brief presentations by one of the speakers up here. But most of the time, about 30 minutes for each topic will be discussions between us and also with you. Really want to get your involvement, so please do ask questions or make comments as you see fit. Okay. So before we get going, I think it'll be valuable to spend a bit of time on explaining the New Deal. This summit is being organized by the New Deal for Buildings. A lot of people come up to me and say, what the hell is that? So the New Deal for Building is a campaign, an initiative. I'm not really sure what to call it, it's just what it is. And it really started out of some brainstorming sessions that I had with Jim Lee about 18 months ago. And we were really sort of discussing route to market. Jim is with Symmetrics, and they have some analytics software and some other products that they have. And we were trying to sort of figure out how to make the route to market smoother in terms of how to sell these kind of solutions. And there are sort of tactical ways of doing that in terms of marketing and messaging and everything else. But one of the things that it kind of dawned on me at some point is that there's something fundamentally wrong with the way the building automation system vendors and building owners and facility managers, that communication between these two, between the supplier and the demand side, there's something wrong there. So the purpose of the New Deal was to create a place where some dialogue can occur about this, about the relationship between vendors and owners. So we put out a blog, newdeal.blog is the URL, and we've had many different articles from many different people in the industry talking about various aspects of this problem, about how we're actually promoting or trying to sell these sort of smart solutions for buildings. About a year ago, we released a white paper with CABA. So that was a 3 or 4 month effort that was put in by about a dozen people from the Intelligent Building Council of CABA to continue this discussion. And the white paper is online. It's online on the New Deal blog as well as being available on the CABA website. If you want to read, it's kind of a long piece, about 50 pages or whatever. But the sort of the conclusion, if you boil it down, the conclusion of the white paper work that we did, the discussion, was the importance of these 3 tenets. Open standards, I think we all understand what that's all about, certainly in the context of building automation systems. Digital twins, which is really how the cloud, the way to think about the cloud is that it's actually a digital twin of the physical entity, which is the building and everything that's in it. So that's the concept of digital twin. And service transparency, which is how we should really be thinking about delivering the services and the products to the customer, again, to the building owners and facility managers. What's interesting about these 3 tenets is that they're the 3 tenets that are essentially behind a lot of the disruptive tech companies of today. If you take Uber, for example, Uber is all about those 3 things. It's all about open standards, because obviously in their case it's not things like MapMap, but it's things like GPS and HTML and iOS and Android and various other standards that they use. Without that, you couldn't have Uber. There had to be these standards. Uber is also about digital twin, because essentially what's happening in Uber is that if you are an Uber client, they know where you are at all times, and they also know where the cars are. Right? So the cloud of Uber is basically a sort of a digital twin of the physical realities of the passengers and drivers. Right? So that's kind of the way of actually thinking about it. And service transparency, that's kind of the hallmark of a lot of the tech companies. Right? You see the driver, you see his name, and as a driver you see everything else about the passenger. Right? So it's the same tenets that we think are important in addressing this problem in the building automation space. So the next discussion was really about, in the New Deal, is about the landscape. You know, what are we actually talking about? You know, we can't have a discussion about the relationship between vendors and owners without understanding the landscape, who's actually in play. And so the way we kind of looked at it is that there's this layer at the bottom, which is all about systems, everything from lighting to HVAC, power, utilities, all the way to physical security and CCTV, and potentially a lot of other sort of smaller systems. These are the systems that run buildings. We kind of all know that. These are the systems that a lot of us are actually involved with. And you have the IT. Everything to do with analytics, big data, the whole sort of IT infrastructure. They're really a part of this landscape. And we sort of collected them up there on the left-hand side. And the third component is essentially the set of services that are required to run and operate the building. Everything from facility management to hospitality, real estate, property management, a whole bunch of other stuff. So you have the systems at the bottom that actually run the building. On the left you have information-centric products, companies, and solutions. And on the left you have the services. And it's essentially these three things that really need to work together smoothly for the vision of smart buildings or intelligent buildings or whatever it is you want to call it to actually work. Right? So it's actually what's in the middle. And an old boss used to tell me that everything's got to have a name. So the name that we've decided to call this thing is Facility IT. Right? So it's the aggregation or the intersection point between these three large industries: the sort of the system side for the building, the information side, and the services. In words, Facility IT is the application of information technology to maximize the value of facilities for their owners and occupants. Right? So that's really important. So, and anytime you're actually thinking about information technology to improve the value of a facility, that's really what Facility IT is all about. So we said, okay, cool. Now what? So one of the things that's interesting about drawing a map like this is you can use it to model things, to play around, to figure out what's going on. So when we started talking about cybersecurity a few months back, we kind of said, okay, let's see how to use this map. If we take IT, I think we all know that IT is hardening. The big part of IT is about securing it from threats, from cyber threats. I read statistics that nearly 10% of IT budget is dedicated to cybersecurity, which is quite an amount. So if we now think about the services on the right-hand side, those are really services. They're all mainly to do with people. The people providing the services on an ongoing basis. So people are not in their own right systems as such. And the systems that they use are typically going to be systems that are supported or delivered or provided by the IT side of things. So from a cybersecurity point of view, it's kind of like that. Right? You can kind of lump all the services with respect to cybersecurity and information with IT because they're actually using the same thing. Which leaves this stuff at the bottom here. I think we all know that the fundamental problem with the systems in buildings is that it's been going on for 30 years, maybe more, and it has enjoyed the luxury of being secure through obscurity. Right? I think we've all heard that term. Right? So I know there's a lot of products, there's a lot of technology that's obviously going to be discussed here, but I think the fundamental problem is that IT people see this bottom layer, see this. Oops, it's not supposed to happen. Anyway, I think you get the point. See this bottom. I don't know what happened there. See this bottom layer as risky. Right? It's just, to them, it's like risk. This guy, go away. Right? So, to go back to the sort of the thing that I mentioned earlier is the whole notion of Facility IT is for these three things to work together. Well, these three things are not going to work together if you have this barrier, right, of going to market. Right? So, that's really what this summit is all about, trying to figure out what that is from a structure of the industry and trying to figure out how we can actually address this both from a technology perspective, standards and other things, but also, more importantly, from a business and sort of industry structure perspective. So that's really where I want to leave my comments, and I want to hand it over to Jim Lee to formally open this summit. Jim.
Thanks very much, Anto. As and thanks everybody for turning out so early. A lot of familiar faces. I appreciate you coming by. So once again, I'm Jim Lee with Symmetrics, and I'd like to start out with some brief opening remarks, and then I'm going to introduce the panel. So, building automation security is a relatively new concern for many organizations. Once proprietary and standalone systems are now networked together to connect data centers, remote access, connecting to utilities, service and operations interfaces. The world has much changed from islands of automation or individual systems to a network world at this point. So many proprietary technologies have been phased out in favor of open system technologies. And then there's been a substantial growth in technologies like BACnet that use IT networks, primarily IP, fundamentally for communication. These are not new trends. We've all been watching this stuff, or most of the people in this room have been along for the ride for 30 years. But the question is what's changed? And while security may be a new topic to many people in the industry, at the same time, a lot of the people in this room and a lot of people on the standards committees have been working on security for the last 20 years. Now, we didn't necessarily get it right on the first several attempts. This is the third major attempt right now with BACnet SC to get it right and get it out there. Now, one of the things that's interesting, and I'll go into this a little more later, is trying to synchro-mesh the slow-moving mechanical systems world with that of IT. And there are lots of challenges there. But this conference really aims to begin that discussion of the key aspects of securing building automation systems, basically through design, operation, and the life cycle of buildings. So we've got an excellent set of panelists here today, and to bring up the pictures of everyone on the screen. That would be great. I'd like to start out, instead of pontificating about all the people here, what I've agreed to do is say their name, and then I'm going to give them 2 to 3 minutes to describe who they are and why they care about this forum. So we're going to start out with Glenn Almendinger in order of appearance. Glenn?
Thanks, Jim. Good morning, everybody. Glenn Almendinger. I'm the founder of Harbor Research. We're a growth strategy consulting firm that's been focused on connected systems and the integration of IT, OT world for, I guess, almost 30 years now. We work with suppliers, innovators, equipment suppliers, innovators, and largely the practice is focused on developing new business and revenue models and market delivery models for these kinds of connected systems.
Great. Thanks. I'd like to introduce Andy McMillan next. Andy?
So I'm Andy McMillan. I'm president of BACnet International at the moment. Throughout my entire career, though, I've been involved in the migration of industries from traditional vertical proprietary solutions to open systems. First in office automation, then I spent a decade or more in industrial automation, and now here for the last 15 years in building automation. So over that period of time, I've evolved kind of three really significant care abouts. One is interoperable systems, because it's the platform that allows users and suppliers to spend their time on important things, rather than on how to connect things, but on the why to connect things, where the real value is. The second one is innovation, and the power of innovation is unleashed with open systems. And third, and maybe most important, is practicality. Systems that are practical, that suppliers can implement, users can deploy, and really solve their problems in the near term.
Thanks, Andy. And next, standing in for Richard Newberry is Dave Bolman, who's VP of Technology for KMC Controls. Dave?
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having the summit. It's something that's really needed for our industry. And KMC is we're celebrating our 50th year. We're a manufacturing firm, and so we have distributors across the world to install our equipment, and that we've been doing BACnet for about 15 years, and we got into the Internet of Things about 4 years ago. But we were already dealing with IT departments long before that, as you install building automation systems. And the thing one of the big things that we try to encourage our customers, the installers, is don't show IT any fear. And the way that you do that is you have to learn. They're kind of like, I call it junkyard dogs. If they smell fear, you're gone. But you don't have to know everything they know, and that's great for a summit like this to help educate and share war stories and good stories too together. So.
Thank you. Next, Jim Butler from Symmetrics, Chief Technology Officer of Symmetrics. Jim.
Good morning. I've been involved in the development of the banking standards for almost 25 years now. So I'm here representing the banking committee, as it were. We've done a lot of things over that time. I don't know whether you remember, but the initial version of the banking standard featured Novell NetWare just as prominently as TCP/IP. Obviously, the world has changed a little bit since then. I was involved in the development of BACnet IP, and then setting up the BACnet testing laboratories, and was its first manager for the first 6 years of its operation. It's in much better hands now, I'd like to say. I've been overseeing, as it were, the BACnet IT working group, and specifically today I'd like to talk about what we've been doing recently with BACnet SC.
Great, thanks, Jim. I'm George Meister from Lloydtech and now Delta Electronics.
Morning, everyone. My name is Hans-Jörg. I am one of the co-founders of Lloydtech, and I'm working for Lloydtech since 1999. The core team's background within Lloydtech has always been computer science and communications engineering, and this is why we have always put quite lots of efforts into IP communication, adding also cybersecurity. And one of the major topics for me is here also to educate and get a chance to discuss with you guys how our integrators and our customers get more familiar with cybersecurity, how to set up systems, how to plan systems. I think this is one of the fundamental issues that we have currently on our market. It is awareness. Too many things are completely open in this world, and if you just use standard off-the-shelf tools, you find thousands of devices online without any password settings, proper setups. It's pretty amazing actually, and I think this is what we are fighting against.
Thank you. Robert Hemmerdinger, also from Delta Controls and now Delta Electronics.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm the Chief Sales and Marketing Officer for Delta Controls. I think our history in BACnet is quite well documented. We've been in BACnet since the get-go, really. It's a big part of our value to the market. What's interesting, and it's happening over the last couple of years that we're getting very excited about, is the occupant experience and how occupants are getting much more connected to the building. They're using their own devices to control and operate their environment within the space. And of course, that has ramifications when it comes to cybersecurity. So we're starting to see the push for cybersecurity coming from the top down in the organization. We're also starting to see the pull. We're starting to see the occupants as they use the building and they interact with the building with their own devices. That needs to be done in a very secure way. So we're starting to see it from both ends, and that's a very fascinating time right now, and that's certainly going to help us accelerate this effort.
Excellent, thank you. And finally, Carol Lamonaco, who is the Senior Program Manager for Security at Johnson Controls and many other things. But Carol?
Thank you. Yes. So I've had over 35 years in this industry, fresh out of college, and over the years we've been active. Our company's been active with BACnet, and over the years, I'd say last 10 to 12, cybersecurity with some of the more mission critical sites has really become a necessary item. And I'm one of those people on the front lines that kind of bridges from the field guys and the IT, and kind of speaks both languages. And so I'll do some presentations on that. And it's really, like I said, I can see it, you know, really stepping up. Big step change in the last 4 years, where we're seeing now contracts with language about how to harden the system, very strict policies. And so I can't wait to, you know, to see how all this plays out, because I think we're in a very interesting time, and we'll see how things go, and hopefully we'll meet both sets, IT and OT's requirements.
Great. Thank you, Carol. Well, we look forward to your questions, and we're going to start now with Glenn Allmendinger is going to deliver the keynote and set the stage, and we'll move on to the conference. Glenn?
Thanks, Jim. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see several familiar faces. For those that are familiar, this story will be familiar. Just to carbon date myself in this silly story, we were working for Hughes Aircraft in Rockwell in 1998, and I went to back-to-back meetings in the same week. And both meetings were about using public wide area networks to track assets in their states. I remember calling my partner in Boston that night from LAX and telling him, this is so complicated, we won't have to think of anything new before we die. This is obviously the 20,000 or maybe 10,000 foot view for this morning, but if you understand the core innovations that could occur in all of these paths, so I picked two to start, sensors and networks. And if I go to the network side and you look at what's coming with 5G and other low power capabilities, and networks able to do a lot more data and application processing with a lot less overhead and power issues and challenges like that. This story has been the same story all along. There's always another wave of technology and innovation coming into this space, and it has so much more to do with how the space, in this case smart buildings and facilities and homes and so forth, absorb that technology and then utilize it. And I think it's been a consistent theme all the way through this. And we like to call this smart systems to just avoid all the acronyms and buzz phrases and the number of cycles I've been through and the number of times I could open the same drawer and republish the same information on the same topic over and over again. One has to stand back and say, this is really more a social challenge than it is a business challenge. And in that context, it has to do with the interrelationship of all the players that inform the space. And as the systems that we're talking about that are smart produce more and more data, the value of the data largely will be driven by interactions in these systems. It's the complexity of the interrelationship with businesses in those ecosystems and value delivery networks that I think, you know, is largely the cultural hurdle that drives or doesn't drive as much innovation in this space as it could. And so, and if you think about the complexity of these systems and how much the number of stakeholders, users, contributors, device manufacturers, IT infrastructure, all these things come together, it's how we structure those relationships commercially and the protocols that we organize culturally that allow, I think, for this kind of shared environment. There really is no precedent for this, and people would point to the IT or the networks world and say there kind of is, but I would argue that they're not that much further along. This is just a more complex world that we're trying to integrate onto these networks and these systems. The way I put this is, if you think about networks and any of these kinds of devices and buildings, and you think about simple apps, compound apps, and complex apps, we're kind of still sitting down in baby steps in what I would describe as simple apps. And these are alerts and alarms. These are essentially hub and spoke kind of constructs where I'm mostly using this stuff to make sure the IT and OT world at least knows the sort of base layer of things I need to keep these systems running. And then the bulk of these applications are largely still focused on maintenance and support of the systems and less on the data value that comes out of these systems. If I think of a compound system, I'll go outside the building space for a second. Just think of a commercial truck today. In the powertrain, it has embedded CAN-based networks that allow for diagnostics and so forth. If it's carrying biopharma products or food products, it probably has some sort of local area or personal area network in the back of the truck to monitor the state of those biopharma products or food products in a manner that I can essentially live up to my compliance requirements. And there's probably a connection to a driver and fleet management system going out on a cellular network. And so I've got, you know, three entirely different technical cultures trying to come together and do something around that vehicle. And essentially the social system that supports that says that everybody's time constant sense of temporality, how these things all fit together and how they might integrate, you know, are not well planned or not planned synchronously. Building, same story, whether it's power systems, physical movement, lighting, HVAC, climate control, et cetera. I mean, these are all things that are operating in their own technology innovation cycles. They're now needing to be synchronized across these things. But I would argue we're in a toehold in this compound value story. And this is where the data value becomes much more substantial than just the alert, the alarm, and the crude network value. And it would be my contention, and I think just to set the stage for all of this, you know, whether people realize it or not, cybersecurity and whether I'm securing these systems at a device level, at an application level, on a network level, that kind of unified control of how we secure these networks, while a key enabler could be the significant inhibitor of all these systems getting adopted in the end. And so, you know, if this is a story where the blade cuts both ways, we need to make sure it cuts the way we'd like it to cut, which I would largely come back and say I think is based on how this social system evolves over time and how the interrelationship of vendors in a more open and operable world decide to share and leverage these kinds of technologies to do what everybody, and I think Jim said it best earlier, people have been toiling on security for quite some time. It's just not well understood and not well, I guess, culturally embraced. Last story is, I would just say the technical development cultures that have evolved out of the controls, IT, and network world are not very synchronous either, and they're not very well organized in a way that they're, the synchronicity, if you will, or the mesh of their innovations are playing harmoniously. So, you know, if I think of the network world and I go to the mobile carriers as just one example of this, you know, they are running the largest, essentially real-time distributed network on the earth, networks on the earth. The problem is they only understand two APIs, a cell phone and a smartphone. They've never seen a building device, if you will. If you go to the IT crowd, that's still a batch compute architecture. Everything I put into a giant soup stock pot, and I organize it, and I try to predict what might happen tomorrow, next week, next month, next quarter, based on what happened previously. And of course, the controls world does, in fact, work and evolve in a state-based, real-time, deterministic world. My joke has always been they're so obsessed by control that they don't really understand the information value that the data from these systems produces. So when you put those three personas together and you say, hey, secure my future, make this stuff work harmoniously, you know, it's not the best cocktail party. I'm not sure I'd decide to go there on my own if I had to. And so my final point is, it's really hard to get everybody on the same page, and I think that's a lot of what this discussion is about. Obviously, a huge amount of education value can be rendered in this space, just to level set people, but a lot of different businesses with a lot of different priorities. But I think we should view this more as a social challenge than a technical challenge, and even a fundamental business challenge. Thank you.
So if you do have any questions, I mean, this will be a great time, but just line up on the microphone. Microphone's lonely over there.
All right, since no one's queuing up, we'll move on into my slide. So while Anto's getting the slide up, I'll just start talking. So I'm here to try to set the stage for the state of cybersecurity. I'm going to start out with a historical timeline of when we started and what we've done. And just to say that people have been talking about the convergence of building automation and IT for decades, but we finally reached an inflection point where that convergence basically has to happen now. And technology is really only an enabling factor there. The real problem is trying to synchro-mesh procurement methodologies. So at the end of the day, a lot of the problems that we have come down to purchasing and the time constants that the two different worlds work at. So if you look at the engineered systems world, the world we deal in, which is a bid and spec world, systems are procured to last for at least 30 years. And if you look at a building, there are only two times when investment is permitted in a building. When it's new and being built, and when it is sold. And there's a pro forma where money can enter the building. And okay, over a 30-year period, you try to superimpose IT, where everything's changing every 3 years, 5 years maximum. And the funding mechanism is really an ongoing systems integration fundraising. So there's no way that we're going to build sophisticated IT systems to run the underpinnings of what we do, predicated on a 30-year plan, when the sand's going to wash out from under our feet every 3 to 5 years. So it's broken and it's going to have to change now. If we can figure that out, if we have to synchronize the slow-moving building world with IT and security, and as Anto mentioned, we really call this convergence facility IT. And in its end state, IT departments are going to be responsible for building automation networks. Next slide. So starting out, in 1820, central heating was invented. First air-conditioned building, San Antonio, Texas, 1926. If you look at the history of controls, they were primarily mechanical and pneumatic controls. One nice thing about pneumatic and mechanical controls is that they were all interoperable. You could buy different pieces from different vendors and they would work. In 1973, the Arab oil embargo and the associated oil shocks caused great entry of technology into energy management and control of buildings. And mini computers were overlaid over those pneumatic systems. And the beginning of proprietary lock-in technology started. By 1983, direct digital control was introduced, and that's basically microprocessors using computer networks communicating to terminal end devices in the building. And by 1987, the BACnet committee was formed, Building Automation and Control Network, for those of you who don't know it, under the auspices of ASHRAE, to basically solve the proprietary lock-in problem. Very quickly, BACnet started adopting mainstream IT technologies. First ArcNet, then Ethernet, and very quickly the Internet Protocol. So if you look at, overlay that period of time, as Jim Butler said, Novell sort of lost and IP won, and suddenly we found ourselves in the IP networking business at scale. And so by 1999, BACnet Annex J, which is BACnet IP, was released and came into full swing. Now, it's not that people weren't thinking about technology at the time, but if you're running on IP, quickly the best way to secure it is maybe using existing IT technologies, like virtual private networks and virtual LANs. You can see in the yellow bar that started off somewhere around that time frame. And just to give some other things, in 1999, we founded the BACnet Manufacturers Association, now BACnet International, that Andy runs, and kicked off the testing program, which Jim Butler set up and others like Duffy O'Craven ran for many years here, to basically list and test BTL, BACnet Testing Lab marks to certify that products work. First product was marked in 2002. Around 2004, and this is really a bracket of time between 2004 and 9 and 10, real work began on security. So the original BACnet standard had a head fake towards security, but nothing real in it. But by 2004, people thought that it was time to really have security in BACnet. And a lot of work was started. And what ended up happening is the BACnet committee and many sages in the industry developed a beautiful security technology to secure BACnet all the way down to the terminal device level. Unfortunately, as the internet grew, events were breaking very quickly, and many of us, including at my own company, made the decision that it doesn't matter how good the security standard designed by our industry is, nobody's going to adopt it. Why? It's because of that fast pace and change of the underlying IT technology underneath. So we decided at that time that the only way this is going to work is if we as an industry embrace IT technologies. So way back in 2009, Cisco was very interested in getting into the building automation business and launched a business unit, and we partnered with them to design the next secured version of BACnet, and we called it IT-friendly BACnet, or BACnet IT. And at that time, Jim Butler became the chairman of the subcommittee in the BACnet standard to design that standard. And unfortunately, one of the shortcomings of our great ASHRAE ANSI accredited standard process is it takes forever. And it has now been a subsequent decade since we started that effort, and it's just coming down off the jacks now. And what's exciting is that it's not our first attempt at security. It's not the thought that we haven't been thinking about security for a long time. This standard is about to go out for its third public review draft. There have been many interoperability sessions, and Jim will shed some more light on that as we go. But we hope that sometime this year, BACnet SC, or BACnet Secure Connect as it's called, will be released. And it basically uses traditional IT technologies to standardize BACnet devices, IP devices down to the terminal level. However, it doesn't standardize the older legacy devices. Jim can talk about that more. Next slide, Phil. So I've basically just reviewed a brief history of security for building automation networks, but what are the next steps in the journey? I think that people have used and will continue to use traditional IT technologies to try to wrap IoT networks. But now is really the time to move beyond those nascent steps and to bring true device-level security to building automation. And to that end, I'd like to introduce this more detailed framework, which will work on to build solutions with BACnet SC at its foundation. And we expect, as I said, BACnet SC to be done hopefully sometime this year. And I want to point out that it actually, BACnet SC does not solve the entire security problem, which is very broad. In fact, I'll cover some of the broader aspects of security on my next slide, but for now I'd like to break the security problem down into these following categories of authentication, encryption, authorization, software updates, vulnerability detection, intrusion detection, and network management and monitoring. So if we look at the standards that play across that spectrum, BACnet SC applies really to the authentication and encryption section. For things like authorization, we expect other industry standards like OAuth to be used. Software updates may be standardized, they may be proprietary. There are many people that are vying to provide that service to people. Vulnerability detection, BACnet SC has some limited application there. But things like intrusion detection will be traditional network access controls and behavioral analysis. And if we look at things like network management and monitoring, SNMP, log files, a lot of the other traditional IT security things will be used. Now, if you're trying to build a standard that will be broadly adopted and used by IT people, it basically has to be completely compatible with what they want to use. And we've been doing our best to do market research, and we're looking forward to more input from people as to how to get that feedback so that we can incorporate architectures and solutions that people will actually use. Okay, so what is the timeline for security deployment? The industry is poised to very quickly deploy BACnet SC in terms of software and products. This stuff can be built into software protocol stacks and can be out to the industry in a year. But where does that leave us with legacy systems and products? And basically we'll need gateways to connect those so that we can allow security without obsoleting these legacy systems. And once again, if you look at the 5 million commercial buildings in the United States and realize that we have only 1% new construction a year and 10% retrofit, that leaves an awful lot of buildings that have legacy technology which will require gateway and bridge security solutions. And of course this will phase in over time. Testing will have to be created through groups like BACnet International and BTL to ensure compliance and interoperability. Finally, customers, as Hans Jorg pointed out, customers need to specify and acquire the technology. Many specialized consulting firms are going to be needed to fill this void. There's a tremendous lack of capability in the industry with very few people that have the sophistication to really standardize these kinds of things. There's tremendous pent-up demand for the technology at large enterprise customers, military, government, enterprise. But there's actually less, but still growing demand at the lower end of the market. The tilt-up suburban office buildings that are owned by a real estate investment trust. People are just not as concerned about that infrastructure as they are about an operating room or a military base. But we expect IT security adoption to be quite fast but uneven. So really starting out in a lot of these enterprise type locations. Next slide, Andrew. So I mentioned that security is not just a technology problem, and it's not just a BACnet problem. It's a big problem that's not going to be solved by one company alone. So there are business process issues, human factors issues. If you look at somebody who's really taken and broken the problem down in great detail, NIST has done this beautiful job of laying out a framework. And what you can see is, if you look at the technologies that we've standardized, it really is a minority of this chart. If you look at the other things that you need to do in terms of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, many of these are human factors items. So the industry really has to get through the learning curve of figuring out how these other solutions are going to come to the fore, in addition to the technology solutions that we're bringing with security. And that's going to be a fairly major challenge. So just to point out a few of those challenges, what happens, to give an example, if a new building is being constructed and we're putting in an IT-based, a complete IP-based control system. Well, the IP system and the security, the information technology group hasn't even shown up to the building. We, as the contractors that are building the building, basically have to design and deploy that whole infrastructure. Set up the IP addresses, set up the switches, wire it, everything. And then when the building's handed over, that has to be handed over to the IT department. So there's a whole process around that. What if there is no IT department and it's one of these suburban tilt-up office buildings that no one cares about? Who's going to be responsible then? Who will hold the security keys for the controllers on the site? So if you allow your local building contractor, this is to Glenn's point, if you allow your local building contractor to be the sole holder of those keys, you just reversed 30 years worth of open system interoperability and given the pricing power back to the local building contractor. So it doesn't sound like a very bright idea. Of course, if they don't have the keys, then they can't fix it when it breaks. So there'll be many participants in the nascent building automation security world. The important next step is to advance the envelope on frameworks and standards to basically allow the security problems that are not solved by BAC.SC or other existing technologies to be solved. And I think that's a big challenge, is to break this down and really see how that market develops. And finally, the NIST framework is a vision which has been fully implemented by nobody. And there's a necessity for the industry at large to adopt the ideas, but it's incumbent to build out that vision, and we hope to nucleate that discussion today. So to that end, I hope somebody will step up to the microphone and say something or throw some stones. Stop talking, please. Any comments? Don't be shy.
I can ask one.
Sure, please go ahead.
Can you come up to the microphone, please?
I can. Microphone.
Over there.
That looks like a microphone.
So I guess, by the way, thank you, very interesting. The open versus closed, I guess we started there saying, we need to move towards open-based systems. Just the move from closed to open, do you think has opened up this whole problem of security? When we were closed systems, obviously it was so much easier to make it secure. So now we are going completely 180 degrees, I guess, towards open systems. Is there a point in between where we are open, we realize all the advantages of open systems, but certain areas are completely closed, so that can be highly protected, and then you have these kind of what I call concentric circles of more and more. Most protected, less protected, and so on, and then completely open. Is that a possibility?
I can give you some examples of how the industry has come out over time. So one interesting thing would be fire alarms, where we have basically life safety, mission critical systems. So a fire alarm uses a technology called a Style 7 Class A fault tolerant network. And as the industry has decided, those networks can be interfaced at a central point for management and control for these other systems, but those systems remain completely proprietary. So I think it depends largely on the business model that you're looking at and the benefits. But what we're trying to achieve in this forum is to get the best of both worlds, is to basically keep the open system philosophy as well as try to bring security to the best of our ability. Anyone else on the panel take that?
I wouldn't mind hearing from the three of you at the end who are from control companies in terms of where we are now, which is really what this section, this part is all about.
I guess just to throw in one more thing, so we've talked about the back network. Now, if you step over into KNX or Modbus or any of those systems, are you off on your own now, or?
Well, I just think it's a good question about closed to open and secure. And I actually we go all the way back to Anto's example from the very beginning. If you think about Uber, right? Uber is using payment systems, it's using your GPS data. It has to be secure, yet it has to be open. So I don't think openness is an excuse for a lack of security in the building automation space. And I think that's a kind of stance all of us take within the manufacturers. And I think everyone in the buildings community.
And I will say about fire alarm and smoke control, I do a lot of that as well. And there is a need to have some of those things not openly, available for, let's just say, the bad guys. We have enough, sometimes issues with people inadvertently, accidentally, not realizing they're going to, do something that interferes maybe with some fire alarm system or something. So it's heavily regulated for a reason, right? It's your life safety, the egress systems that get people out of the building. So I don't know if you really want to open all that up. I would rather you didn't.
I would also make the point that when we go back 30 years and talk about proprietary systems, the challenges of security were different. I'm not sure those systems will be any more secure today than the systems we're calling open. We didn't have the external communities that wanted to break into them, so they weren't broken into, but I'm not sure they couldn't have been. In fact, if you look at industrial networks, There are real examples of security problems with industrial networks that are proprietary.
Proprietary alone does not give you any security. It's just a matter of how you get access to these networks. And when we talk about cybersecurity, I think we can also agree that security does not mean just protect everything from the outside world. It means also to protect from the inside. And their proprietary networks do not offer any kind of security issue.
Yeah, some would argue with with open security or with open protocols and that you've got more eyes to be able to look at that problem and actually come up with better, more mature security models rather than in a closed system. You don't have as many eyes, you don't have as much knowledge to be able to look at it. So in some ways, open learning is even better.
Any other questions? Sir.
Thank you so much for putting on this summit. I'm very new to the industry myself, being a student at a local college here. And this is something that interests me very much. We touched on this in one of our classes, and I'm curious, particularly because of the comments that were just given about the challenges. In you all's opinion, how difficult is the challenge to solve all of the issues that you both have already touched on? And do you have maybe a timeline as far as when at least the major issues can be resolved so that all of these systems can work together no matter what building, no matter what systems are being used?
Glenn, I think that's yours.
How to say this in an optimistic fashion? At the rate we've been going, after my death and possibly before yours. It's got some distance to go, a lot of moving parts and lots of different relationships and many diverse and not always well-aligned motivations on the part of the different constituents that comprise the things on these networks. And very, very complex world to try and get orchestrated. But one that could use some youth and objectivity, so hang in there.
So could you talk about another space outside of, away from buildings that's sort of significantly more mature, that's almost there? Does that thing exist?
Well, I mean, yeah, we're back to like the IT world to some extent, or we're back to, I mean, part of the problem in the building space, just from a behavioral standpoint, is these systems, well, think of a car or a truck. You know, it's a complex set of subsystems that are very tightly coupled, and, you know, you'd kill yourself if they weren't tightly coupled, and, you know, we just don't design these systems, and, I mean, it really is a set of cultural and adoption hurdles that have to do with just the way the industry is structured and the way these things are specified and the way these systems are upgraded. And, you know, try as you might to convey the value of data and secure systems in that context and the kinds of things you can do to optimize the costs and the services provided in these kind of billing usage contexts. Those things haven't been compelling enough to drive people to step up to this topic in a more overt way. And I think, to Jim's point earlier, I think this has to happen now. There's no question that this will cause lots of really big issues and problems if it isn't addressed. And so you're kind of finally at the gun to temple at hand. So I think basically, you know, this will move forward and probably in an uneven fashion, but it will, because it needs to and it has to.
I would also suggest there's not an end point. It's not like, oh, here's it, we're done.
Right.
No more than IT's ever been done with security, neither will we be. It's an evolving thing, like 5G follows 4G. There's a follow-on to whatever we think is the issue now in security. What's important is to get the foundation laid and the industry connections made that allow the security part of building automation to continue to progress more on pace with the IT kind of security rather than maybe the traditional, how often do you change the fundamentals of the mechanical systems.
And I think we also need to accept that cybersecurity is a moving target. And when you just look at how many software updates you get for your mobile phones or whatsoever, most of these updates are dealing with cybersecurity. So we are always more or less behind. there's always new threats, new problems that we see. And the big problem that we have in the building is usually when the building automation system is set up, nobody's touching it anymore. So it gets old. When it gets old, it gets unsecure. Based on what I said. And this is the biggest issue that we have in this building.
Any other points from this side of the house?
I think that to answer the question, I don't think we'll ever be done, because I don't think digitalization will ever be done. That's something, a realization I had a couple of years ago. Is, you know, we think we're digital, we think we've made that jump. We almost think that it's binary to go from analog to digital, but it's not. It's a constant evolving state, and we'll be constantly doing it. And you've only got to look into your home life to realize that. Right? Just go and look around your house and think of all the things, the technology that you've added, the connected devices that you've added over the past 12 months. Just think what you're going to add in the next 36 months, the next 5 years, the next 7 years. So it's always going to evolve. And we as buildings evangelists or ambassadors, we constantly need to be moving up with technology. That's
right. I agree too. I don't think it's going to ever end. And I think the biggest challenge we have is just understanding our building controls and industry, right? Because the new buildings get built, and they're not going to have the monies to, completely tear out something. They've got to learn to maintain it. And, I think it's on both sides. Make it easier to maintain, and then give them tools and education so they can keep maintaining it. So that's what I think we're still going to be doing that 10 years from now.
Yeah, and the immediate thing what we're doing now is building that framework between IT and OT and really helping to secure the systems together as an integrated system. I think that's coming pretty quickly, but we'll never stop innovating and inventing new things. Who knows what's going to happen after we're all gone, so.
Great. Sir?
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having us here today. Question for you. I run into this a lot, and wanted to hear how the panel maybe addresses this. When we talk about BACnet, we talk about open standards for controls. It's fantastic. A lot of times when we talk as a manufacturer that we have, we're BACnet, if you will, top to bottom, BTL listed, on and on and on, and yeah, we are BACnet, and as a manufacturer of other companies, you guys experience this too. I want to know what your feedback is on, after you review all that and you show all that information, and the customer's like, yep, we believe you're BACnet, and they said, well, we want an open system. And I look back at them and say, I just showed you BACnet, right? You're not understanding. Well, no, I want an open system. And then I go back, what are you defining as open system? Their definition is open market. And there's a difference. Okay? Off the shelf, over the counter versus, certification. So I get this tear here between, calling it BACnet, I'm open, to no, I'm not open, or we're not open because I want open distribution. So I was just curious on, from a qualification, certification type process, how that kind of fits into BACnet. Because it really kind of tarnishes, if you will, the name and the reason we're doing this.
Right. Who would like to take that first? Andy?
I'd like to start only because I've been involved in BACnet for a long time and involved in the testing and certification for a long time. This is the first time I've heard this. So this is an interesting observation. And actually we can chat a bit after. I'd like to understand better, to explore it more. But I've also been involved in open systems in 3 different industries, and that framing has been the same in all of them. So this is a unique challenge in my experience. I'd like to understand it better. And when we understand it, we can address it. Part of our job as BACnet International is to educate people. Right. So if we missed something, we want to pick that up.
Anyone else?
I was going to say, I think Brad's question, and you didn't introduce yourself, I just realised, but I know Brad. So I think his question is about freedom of choice, about where the customer can get the product from, right? Don't want to be locked into an integrator or into a branch. So I think it's a route to market question.
The specific product, the actual device.
Right.
It's very,
yeah, it's interesting. It's almost separate from cybersecurity in that we've always had that question, we've always had that comment, we've always had that conversation with our customers. But I guess cybersecurity kind of overlaps in it as well in terms of whether it's an open system and how I can get availability to it. So yeah, it's an interesting observation.
Yeah, I'd make a comment, which I would say that in the BACnet community over the last 30 years, we've done everything that we possibly can to create an open, transparent standard for testing and really open transparency of the development of the standard, which of course takes a long time, and open and level enforcement of what the standard is. So from a technology standpoint, BACnet is absolutely open. From a channel standpoint, it's really a question of how distribution has developed in the industry and the potential of certain products to have multiple competing distributors in the same market. And so it's really apples and oranges, but what we've discovered over the years is some customers value having competing distributors. It actually has nothing to do with the underlying technology, it's the channel structure. And so it could be easily solved by having competing distributors in a market of different products. Now, you know, that is absolutely heresy to speak to an industry where the control of the channel is everything about the business and the profit. However, as controls commoditize, the problem might solve itself very quickly, in that the pricing power of those controls in the local market might be destroyed anyways. And if that's the case, those distributor channels and networks may reconfigure themselves naturally. But you know, we also might all be dead before that happens.
This is the wrong analogy. Could you sort of say who you are and who your affiliation, so everybody knows?
Yeah, sure. I'm not this tall. I'm Monica McMahon with Optico Networks. There's so much optimism about how long you're all going to live. So my question, at the beginning someone mentioned how 10% of IT budgets go towards cybersecurity. And right now in the building automation and controls world, 0 budget goes towards security. If we're going to buy a product and there happens to be a more secure version at the same price, yeah, maybe I'll go with it, but that's sort of the math. So how do we change the people that are putting up the specs, the building owners, to say, yeah, put an extra 10% in for cybersecurity. Don't just go with the cheapest bid. And then adding to that, we also have building owners who say, once it works, never update anything. Keep it as it is. We don't want to change anything. And they're not allowing this technology that exists and is great to even make the building more secure.
Carol, would you like to start?
I would. Thank you. Yeah, so I think it's the thing we need to do is have the cybersecurity education for all. We need the facility guys to be educated, the vendors, the suppliers, and third parties, and then in our specifications, we actually need to have the right amount of cybersecurity features that that customer needs. So the 5-story office building versus the 50-story building in a big, large metropolis city, right? Or, you know, military versus U.S. government versus whatever, hospital. They all have different needs. So it's not like one thing. So I think after we come to that, then we can say, okay, he needs a low or moderate or high type of security, and that's what that means. And then you can better quantify what that means. And then also on the support side, I think a lot of education has to be there about, because the old school was, and I couldn't believe my ears when I heard it in the last couple of years, was put the server in and never touch it, never patch it. It's like, what planet are you guys on, you know? That's going against, you're not getting all those updates, you're not staying current. So that is still in some people's minds. And I think we have to explain to people the patching and change management that maybe the IT person could do for the server part. And maybe if the vendor needs to do it, or service guy for the specific building controllers or, you know, application devices. Sometimes they're very specific where you need special tools and all that. So I think it's, yeah, we'll have to revisit this, and I think some of the ASHRAE committees are taking a look at this. There's some GPCs looking at how do we put cybersecurity requirements or specifications out there? How do we develop them? Do you have a separate section, or do you fold it into Division 23, 26? And that is, you know, that's gonna take a while to hash that out. Does that help?
My viewpoint on that is that I've been holding my breath for 20 years to wait for the procurement process to allow for some dollars for any kind of innovation in this industry. And, you know, it's waiting for Godot. Godot ain't coming. I'm expecting the IT industry to overrun this and own it. And it will be IT dollars because it will be IT systems by the time this damns out. And no prediction on how long that's going to take. Anyone else?
Hi, good morning. Dan Sullivan from AMK Consulting Group. Thank you again for putting this session on. My question was, shortly after the data breach from Target and Home Depot, I attended a session that was put on by the Department of Homeland Security, and they listed whitelisting as the #1 area to prevent security breaches versus blacklisting. I was interested in this group's thought on whitelisting, how that applies to BACnet, and what the differences there are, and also if there is any interaction with groups such as the Department of Homeland Security to keep in touch what is going on with the bigger realm of national security.
Thank you. Carol?
Yeah. So on both fronts, I've picked up the phone a couple occasions, and there's be somebody on the other end identifying themselves from one of those big departments that you mentioned. So a couple of things that I think there are some discussions going on. Some of the vendors, believe it or not, have people that are very directly coupled with Department of Homeland Security and other agencies. You might find that if the company's big enough, they're actually talking to, you know, some of the government just to watch things from different, you know, a possible attack or something like that. So to get on your point, there have been discussions: do we blacklist, do we whitelist? And believe it or not, on some of the scanning products, they're doing a lot of whitelisting. And it has come up where they look at it and it will show a threat from a perfectly good building automation controller. So the direction was to work with them. So that's a big challenge for somebody that's writing a virus scanning program to be able to work with all the vendors. So I think also there could be some improvement in that area, but the reason they want to whitelist is so they know for sure. And then on the blacklist, they also frown from putting some things there because of the mixed technology. So what you'll see is that no matter what you do, the whitelist or the blacklist, whatever which way you go, the main thing is to keep up with it. That's what we're finding out, is once you don't keep up with that, you put out a new product, it's going to show up again, and you're going to get calls.
Okay, finally, Jim wants to make a comment. Okay, sure. Jim, go ahead.
So, from a BACnet perspective, our job is to enable communication, right? And what you talk about when you discuss things like whitelisting and blacklisting is who are you going to authorize to access your system? And up to this point, that has largely been outside of the domain of BACnet. Manufacturers have implemented, in some cases, their own proprietary methods for determining who's allowed to turn off your chiller, for example, or to access more sensitive data. I would expect that eventually the BACnet committee will get around to thinking about this problem and maybe even doing something about it. But for now, the implementation of things like whitelisting and blacklisting is outside of the scope of BACnet.
Just one comment to this topic from my side. You know, I got more and more the impression that this world is more or less split in half in a way. You know, there is customers, specifically governmental organizations, when they feel responsible for their buildings, they are aware that there is efforts behind keeping their buildings secure. There is budgets for this. We, from the manufacturer side, we make sure that we have at least every 6 months updates on the firmware, etc., etc. But it also means that there is work that they need to do to update this. That's unfortunately a minority. And most of the time, when we do, for instance, these kind of updates, many other customers ask us, why is there an update every 6 months, you know? So the acceptance is simply not there, and what is asking for network security.
Okay, we're going to take the final question. We've run a little over from Ed Sullivan from Building Operating Management. Ed?
Yeah, thank you. And just to kind of follow up on that, your comment, and Jim, your comment about IT taking over the building automation system. For now, I don't think that's where we are. And what is, I'd be interested in comments, what are the things that building owners need to understand, just real quickly? It's a massive issue, and I think that's part of the problem. Is there a simple, straightforward message that can, you know, like, people can just get a hold of? Because this is only one thing that the building owner is responsible.
Just in a broad sweep, I would say the reason we're in this room is to help figure out what that message is right now, because we're still learning how to impedance match what we've been doing for the last decade to the owner in the way that it's going to be, in a way that it's going to stick. Anyone else like to take that, Andy, from it? No. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think that is the question, and that's the question that goes back to Monica's question. That will be able to justify whatever percentage, somewhere between 0 and 10, on cybersecurity.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on to Carol's piece right now. Carol.
Perfect timing too.
Right.
Okay, so I just want to see a show of hands of how many people are working for IT departments. Do we have a lot of IT guys? Any at all? So few. Okay. So Anto had asked me to talk about the minds of the IT. So I'm going to kind of give everybody a broad, hopefully I'm not stereotyping it too much, but this is really from my experience. So the first thing people, when I answer the phone, it's usually a tech, and they're like, you know, hey, these guys don't trust me, or I can't understand what they're asking me for, you know. So I try to kind of tell them who are they, you know, just explain who the IT guys and their responsibilities and things like that. So everyone's got to understand, you know, historically, the IT department didn't have to worry about BAS systems because they were pneumatics or mechanical in nature. And, you know, the very first implementations, you know, they came out on ArcNet, they were separate systems. And so, you know, the IT guys kind of ignored it because it was just, you know, they didn't know that there was one in the building, probably, you know. They came a year after the building was built, accepted, and so they really didn't know until, you know, lately. And you got to also understand these guys are very, you know, they're up on these certificates. They have to get training for certain devices that they manage because, you know, that's just how it is. And so, you know, I just try to paint, you know, hey, and give them an idea. This is kind of like who these guys are. And around the 2000s, early 2000s and later, you know, as we went to Ethernet, that's when the IT guys started looking at their networks, and we got that idea to converge, you know, how we can put it on the IT corporate, it's great, and save some money. And I think at that time, it was like eye-opening, where I think the IT guys said, you know, what are these things, you know, and what's BACnet? You know, I remember I've got a son in IT, and working in IT, and he said to me, Mom, because I used to drag him to ASHRAE meetings, right, with the little boy. So, you know, he used to, you know, not know what things were, but he said, you know what, Mom, I saw one of those things that said BACnet on it the other day. And he said it was an IT closet, it said BACnet. He goes, is that thing we were talking, you know, you were talking about, you know, when I was a little boy? And I go, yeah, that's it. That's, you know, the specification got out there, and now there's products being made. So I think it's a learning curve for these IT guys, right? And the other thing you got to understand nowadays, right? The IT department has to manage so many things. They've got to help do these risk assessment. You know, they will hand you over a 200-page questionnaire, and they will expect to have this thing answered, you know, fully, and that you understand everything that they're asking you about. And so they got to realize that doesn't happen, and I can't give it back to you in 3 days, you know. So I think if we understand more, and this is what I try to do with people, is try to give them an idea of who are these IT guys, and what are they thinking, and what's been their background historically, and then you can empathize with them more and explain, and maybe in the end, you know, get along better. Next. So the other thing I have to answer to them is, you know, the next question always is, Carol, what do these people want from me? You know, well, again, the IT guys really want to talk to someone. They don't want to see that you're scared. They want to know that you understand what they're asking, that you give them the proper question, and then of course they're gonna trust but verify. Okay, then you can't blame them, right? They've been told so many things like, oh, that thing's secure, don't worry about it. Well, when they go and scan and find IP cameras that cost $62 on their network, you know, and it's a big hospital, they're worried because they realize that's not protected, right? So I think, you know, again, I'm generalizing, but they want to know what's on their system. They have to. They have to take an inventory. They want visibility. Like, what is that BACnet device? You know, they don't know about bibs. They don't know about all this stuff, right? But they want to know, hey, is that thing supposed to be on our network, or is that some rogue device? Okay? And people laugh and tell me all kinds of stuff. Well, I've been on the other end of a phone call where these guys are telling me they found a wireless AP thing in their flower area of their lobby. Okay, so there's flower plants and all that, and they find things buried in there, and they're like, how did that get in my building? You know? And so it's a real life scenario where they really have to walk around, they have to look and see what's on their network, see if there's anybody else putting out a wireless signal, because if they don't know about it, then they really should investigate it and take it down. The other thing is they want to know about patching, change management. You know, they like to hear that you're putting out updates every 6 months. But they also want to understand a plan. They want to know, well, what do I have to do? I mean, am I going to patch that server? You know, after they learn what the platform is. And they want to know what the vendor's going to do, and is there a contract, a service contract, to do all that? Is that in place? And it's amazing that they understand the need to keep their systems updated. They really do. If anyone in the food chain, they understand that these systems have to be patched. You cannot, if you tell them, oh, you don't have to ever patch them, believe me, they will immediately close their ears and just maybe walk you outside the door, you know, get rid of you if they can. So anyway, I think once you understand that, and then once you start doing that, then they'll ask some other questions. And it's true, I thought it was a silly question. And they'll ask me, where's the BS server? Where is this server anyway? Is it in the server room, or is it in some other place around the building? And I literally had to say to the individual from the IT department, John here, your HVAC controls account executive, he'll take you on a field trip around your building to show you where all these devices are, these BACnet devices, and he'll also be able to show you where the server is. Now, I also have to give you that little story where I was on a big, important job, and some guy told me at lunch, hey, there's a server in the mechanical room, an HVAC server or some kind. He didn't know. And it turns out there was like a lighting server in the mechanical room. And I couldn't believe it when I saw it. And I'm like, whoa, wait till this IT guy hears about that. So we actually, was just sitting there near the wall. And it goes back to, what do the guys want to know? They want to know, we know what we're doing, we're patching, we have a plan, they know the devices are not rogue devices. And once you communicate that, life gets better. It really does. Next. So, the big question I always try to walk away from the scenario and say, you know, why don't these guys see eye to eye? Why don't the IT, OT guys see eye to eye? And I think, you know, just the minimum things, the building control techs and the IT guys, they don't speak each other's language. And it's true. I mean, how many techs do you know have an IT degree, you know, or went back to school or have that? And how many IT departments understand what Division, you know, 23 is? They look at you funny like, what's that, you know? And when you tell them, hey, this building was built a year ago, it was in the plans and specs to have a BAS BACnet system in it. They just don't, you know, they don't know about it. So you kind of have to educate them along the way as well. So that's one of the reasons there's two different entities and they just don't understand each other. And then my second point there is the IT departments are so overwhelmed today. You know, recently in the last few years, we got all these iPhones and they let everybody bring their iPhone in and they want to get on the network. So this bring your own device to work is really, you know, a lot for people to understand because they got to push them that maybe a certificate. They got to, you know, maybe have a separate network for guests. And so their world with all these smartphones, tablets, not saying it's bad, right? But I think it's challenging them more, right? And then they got to worry about new policies and other things, push out updates. So they've got a lot on their plate. The IT guys, I really feel for sometimes. Now, on the other hand, the BAS control guys, you know, the OT side of the business, they really need to get trained on cyber. They really do. I mean, it's something we've got to do in our industry. And again, we're not going to make them the experts, but we've got to make sure that they understand the fundamentals. They understand, you know, this notion of, you know, that what we're trying to protect, and there's a layer approach, and it may be that it's, you know, you got a badge in to get into the building, and, you know, then you'll, you know, get to the server because now it's protected in the server room and all of that. They've got to understand why you got to move that server that you used to have somewhere else, maybe in an engineer's office, into the server room. And then lastly, you got to understand too, part of the OT side, facility managers, when they're in the middle of it, and they just want the BAS techs or the vendor, whoever that's providing the controls, to satisfy whatever the IT department needs. They really do. They want to just like, Carol, can you just answer their questions, you know, about cybersecurity and that BAS system and what is BACnet, and then solve all the, you know, those concerns that they had about reliability, cyber, patching, change management. That's really what they want. Okay, any questions?
Go ahead.
Listening to all of you, especially the last presenter, prompted another question about future technology. By the way, I'm Parrish Ben, a student with Georgia Piedmont Technical College. My question is, what role does AI have as far as the cybersecurity challenge? And are there any other methods or cutting-edge technology that will help simplify the cybersecurity challenge in order to keep buildings open yet secure and also updated?
Anybody want to take that?
Well, we've been talking about you have machine learning and AI. The threats out there actually will change on their own, and you have to start putting in AI into detection, intrusion detection systems and all that, just to see if you've got intruded upon. Is that a word? Intruded upon. And that just gets more and more complicated. And I don't see where things are really going to get really any simpler. It's just there's just more and more things. The threats, they talked about 0-day threats. Now it's 0 hour. Some of them are down to, some people call it 0 nanosecond, meaning it's the threat just continually changes, even on the fly. And the bad guys are using AI as well to get into your thing. So it's already here. You have to have AI in your system.
Yeah, I'll comment. I don't think whatever technology we go with, we just got to be aware of it. We got to analyze it, do a risk assessment. I mean, we're talking about tagging and what tagging, machine learning and BACnet. There's other applications, I'm sure. So whatever the technology they bring to the table, AI, whatever, blockchain, that ever applies, right? We have to have it analyzed, and I'm sure others will too. And just make sure that it's the right technology, and then if there's any risk, or we have to be able to mitigate those.
Wondering if anybody has a sort of horror stories or funny stories working with IT, since we really need to get into understanding what's the relationship with IT.
I was going to say the first rule for us is you bring Mountain Dew and pizza. And really, I mean, you want to become friends with the IT when you can, and you learn their language to some extent, but really remember they really are people just like us, and get to know them. And actually, if you can sit down ahead of time, even if the building owner or the contractor hasn't specified it, a lot of times we find the IT is like the last people to know that you're coming, and that if you know ahead of time who might be there for the IT department, that'll help them and get them going early in the process now.
Yeah, I would second that. I would think, don't treat them as your enemy, because, that's the way it'll be if you do that. But you got to understand, like, again, walk in their shoes, understand what they're trying to understand and why, because, they're trying to figure out what these devices are and what they're doing and who's maintaining them. That's like the second question out of their mouth is, okay, who's maintaining all this, right? So I think if you understand that, it'll break down those walls, those barriers, and we'll all work together better.
Probably 10 years ago now, I wrote a white paper called High Walls and Small Gates. And its purpose was to lay out that IT builds walls around their stuff with very narrow gates. And so does facility management. And for the same reasons, because they're mission critical. No facility manager wants someone messing with a system that isn't his authorized person. And so IT actually isn't different from facility managers. They have a different set of things they're trying to manage, but in terms of this issue, they have exactly the same concern. And once you recognize that, then IT becomes more understandable. Because you'd be the same way about your system if some arbitrary player came in and said, by the way, I'm using your stuff. And you don't need to know what it's for, just let me do it. You'd like that about as much as IT does.
It's just different stuff.
It's just different stuff. It's just different stuff.
I would like to add one more thing. If you have a chance to deal with one IT department in a building, it's great. I have a story where we introduced meshed Wi-Fi devices in a building where there are multiple big tenants in there, and what all these companies that rent space there did on the Wi-Fi side is absolutely incredible. Nobody talks to each other. No channels set up in a proper way. Things like this happen all the time here. And so when you have a chance to have only one IT department in a building, that's the best thing that can happen when you really go into a converged system. But in many cases, in office buildings, shopping centers, whatsoever, where many different stakeholders have rent space, they do their own IT stuff, and these guys do not talk to each other at all. But they use one infrastructure, which is the building automation network. And this is the real concern, actually.
That's a new one. Yeah, that's a new perspective. So you have a question?
Hello, I'm Andy Birch with STC and Air here in Atlanta. I'm a controls division manager for our company. So basically, we do a lot of existing build outs where we go into a building that's already existing and we do a retrofit, more so than new construction. One of the main things that we run into is we run into customers who don't have an IT department, where they're just running with some server they've got from somewhere, and then we come in and tap something in, and then we get a phone call from somebody else, another part of the world, who says, hey, I see this new device, we've got issues, you know, at that point, we get a lot of questions. What I'm really wondering is, this new standard that's coming along, will it be able to integrate itself and activate without having to go into their side of things, into the IT world of their equipment and work? Or will I have to install, you know, a new switch or router on their device and get into their system and kind of, you know, infringe upon their stuff?
Who wants to take that? Yeah.
Well, I'm assuming that when you come in on a project, that you actually want to integrate with the existing system in some way. Is that a good assumption?
No, sir, not really. At that point, generally, we're taking out whatever is there and we're putting in like a new server, so it's all new. But, you know, now it's a new device, new IP address, new MAC address. You know, they've never seen it before. They know nothing about it.
Yeah, I don't think that BACnet SC, or frankly almost any other technology, will make this a completely seamless process for you.
We would actually like them to know you've done that. If they don't, they're not managing their security very well. It should be easy to assure them or provide them whatever they need. But for them to not know it and you not have to deal with them is probably asking too much.
Is this similar in a way to Hans, your point is that we almost assume that IT is organized and it's a single entity. And your point is that it could be multiple IT, and your point is that there is no IT, it's kind of a crowdsourced IT. It's kind of similar, right? So we become the common thing, which is interesting.
It might be better in that mold to go to more of a cloud-based solution for that customer, where you actually, you outsource it, and they just, you have an SLA between you and the customer, and then they don't have to think about it anymore. We're certainly seeing the emergence of that, of cloud-hosted BMS, for that very reason. Then they don't have to worry about updates, they don't have to worry about cybersecurity, it's all handled by the SaaS service.
My view is I think there still should be that touch point with both parties and explain, and I don't think going to a newer revision or another BACnet protocol revision is going to solve all those issues. So I really think there's just, you know, get the two groups together, or, you know, have a kickoff, hey, we're going to do this project, this is what the outcomes are, and, you know, hear the questions out.
And I can understand and agree with all that, with all you said. Mainly my main question is for like us, if we have a smaller system office building where they don't have an IT department, and I put this device in, can it implement its own security protocols and be secure? Or do I have to install something on the router end of their system to make it work?
Are you saying that there is a network there? There's an IT network, but there's no IT department?
Correct, yes.
So who's controlling, who's managing it?
Could be Comcast, could be the local, you know, vendor, the ISP.
There's a concept in security called defense in depth. So you have to, there at all sorts of different layers throughout your network, you're going to have to put something in there. And we've been on jobs where even the IT department, they either they don't exist or they're farmed out, and after a little while we wind up, we know more about their IT and their security than they do. And we have to step up, we tell the building owner, this is what's going on, and do you want us to work with, who do you want us to work with on that? But you have to do a lot of integration, and you might wind up doing some of the IT stuff yourself in order to get your BAS in there.
I'd say my only comment is you're in the IT integration business now. Welcome. Thank you.
So we have another question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi everyone, thanks. These sessions are really terrific. I'm a software developer. I do vendor implementations, and I work with IT departments every day.
I'm just kind of curious to know, what are the expectations as far as scheduling? So when an IT department finds out and, you fill out that questionnaire, which may take days or weeks, once everything's signed and ready to go, the IT department may still need days, weeks to open up ports on their routers. Maybe if it's a multi-building facility, get network connectivity between the buildings where there were firewalls between those buildings previously. It's probably a lot that gets involved in that point. What are your experiences with scheduling after it's all said and done?
So from my experience, I think getting that questionnaire, so the IT department sends you guys a questionnaire, says, hey, I need this filled out, right? So you get it back to them. I found the most positive thing to do is to say to them, here's the questionnaire, here's my name and contact information, and let's get together if you have any questions. And then let's get together for the execution plan. And once you say that, and you get maybe the tech in the field or whoever the field person is, and you get the three parties, either face-to-face or on the phone, life is a lot better. Because again, if there's any other questions, or maybe it's a teaching moment, this is the network riser, these are these backnet things, right? This is a server, right? And we're going to put this in your server room. And once you can go through that and answer any other questions, life is a lot better. So I think it really comes down to just basic, make yourself available, communications, and try to get the parties that need to be together talking.
Yeah, it's kind of, you're coordinating with another vendor in a way, you're right. So, scheduling with them ahead of time, you can tell them, I want to be out here this certain week or whatever, and then if they're available, you have to make sure that they're available because they want to see what you're doing and that too. So it's just again just coordinating things.
You need a good project manager, basically. You need a good project manager.
Thank you.
One more thing I'd add to that is I used to lead an organization that installed distributed energy management to national retailers. So we were installing things across the country on their networks that had to tie back to their servers that had to come out of their safe environment into a web application. And part of what we found was IT to an outside organization is less responsive than to an inside champion. So if you can get your inside champion to be on the right page with IT as well as you, that helps a whole lot. Because they have a different level of clout or influence maybe than any outside party tends to have.
Is there an opportunity to have some kind of structured education for us to educate IT on what it is that we do?
Yes, actually we are, Back International started a couple of years ago trying to develop online self-paced educational courses. We've done a couple. Doing one specifically for IT managers is on our list. It might even be next when we're done here. We'll see.
Sharon?
Good morning. Sharon Dingus with Lofty Plant Consulting. Previously spending about 25 years with controls on HVAC. So one of the things that I would ask this panel is, how has it helped you to bring in the IT department as part of the project development cycle versus we've won this bid, this is now the approved building automation vendor, oh, by the way, we need your help. So do you have any experience you could share on that in that regard?
Yeah, I certainly do. Recently worked on a large project on the East Coast, large hospital, where the IT department was brought in very early on into the development cycle. It was a very early conceptual design build operation, and the IT department ended up being a key stakeholder in that decision. So traditionally when you're bidding for these kind of projects, you're trying to win over a couple of different people, and the IT department had a clear seat at the table and were in a financially decision-making authority. And it helped the project tremendously at the design phase, through procurement, construction. It hasn't finished yet, but I'm sure it will help in the long run as well. It certainly makes a difference, a tremendous difference.
I also would say having that IT person worked on new construction as well as a large retrofit for like hospitals. And again, the IT department was a key, as he said, stakeholder. You cannot omit the, you gotta get them included, right? And so once they understand what you're doing, they may not understand all the protocols and why all these little controllers, but you just tell them, this is what it is, and these are gonna be installed. You can scan, maybe offline, not while I'm trying to bring up the chiller, right? Because you gotta explain there's some critical systems. And then once you explain that and they're there, either, like I said, new construction, well, usually it's after new construction, after about a year old, they're doing inventory. But the fairly new jobs and then the huge retrofits, you'll find that they are an interested party. And again, you solve their questions and can get them as a friend on your side that yes, you are going to walk with them every step of the way to explain how these user accounts work. If there's any integrations to Active Directory, they want to know. Same thing with physical, and then where are the servers? Where are these? Are there firewalls? They want their questions answered. And I think if you can be truthful about it, if there's something you can't do, then you got to have that discussion. Hey, I suggest we mitigate this issue in this way. And do you have any other ideas? And then involve them in the solution because they've got a lot to offer as well.
Yeah, and you might have to reach out yourself too. I mean, it might not be something that the building owner is coordinating for you, or you should not really assume that necessarily. So go ahead and, like I said, bring your Mountain Dew and pizza and talk to those guys.
We're done.
Yeah, we're done.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next speaker. So Jim Butler is going to present remarks primarily from the perspective of the BACnet Committee. Jim?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to try to avoid making this too technical a talk, but I think in any talk about BACnet SC, there are going to be a few buzzwords here. BBMD is going to come up at some point, I'm sure. But I would like to start by saying that BACnet SC is something that we've been working on within the BACnet Committee for several years. And it is a tool that you can use to improve cybersecurity. Buildings are not necessarily insecure today. What we are trying to bring from the BACnet perspective is interoperable data communications that is more secure than we've had before within the BACnet standard. So the point of comparison that I'd like to make is to BACnet IP, which is and has been our solution for communication on TCP/IP networks for the last 20 years. BACnet IP by itself has no native security features at all. So in order to build systems that are secure by some measure, people have used other methods, other technologies. For example, physically separate networks have been used. Now, that's going out of style for a lot of good reasons, but nonetheless, that is one approach that people have taken to trying to make their automation systems more secure. And if you look at a modern airplane, there are lots of separate systems for really good reasons. Another way that people do it is they go hand to the IT department and say, look, we'd really like a VLAN or a VPN for our building automation system so that those pesky students in our university can't interfere with what we're trying to do, which is to keep people comfortable and safe. And I would say that VLANs are probably the most common solution today. Maybe Carol?
Yeah,
yes?
VLANs and VPNs.
But they definitely have their drawbacks. I mean, none of these technologies are perfect. If the VLAN is set up improperly, the bad guys can get in, or maybe your system won't work properly. And we all know that the IT people are changing things. IT systems are not static, and sometimes when they change something, they break something. Relying entirely on VLANs and VPNs for security is not something that the building automation industry is necessarily completely comfortable with. One thing that I didn't mention on this slide is that the automation vendors have also implemented proprietary solutions to make their systems more secure. In the BACnet committee, our mandate is interoperable solutions. So we have to think about what can we do that is going to be easy for the industry to implement and will give us more security than we have today. Next slide, please. So, BACnet SC, which has come out of the IT working group, is a secure, in quotes, meaning we all have definitions for what secure means. It's a more secure way of communicating on TCP/IP networks than other options, such as BACnet IP that we have in the BACnet standard. Two important technical points, which Jim Lee has already touched on today. Messages are encrypted and devices are authenticated using certificate technology. These are fundamental things that are expected today when, for example, you have secure systems. When someone is selling you a secure system, it probably isn't secure if it doesn't encrypt the communication and if the devices are not authenticated. So why is device authentication so important? And I would argue that in many cases it's more important than encryption. Because you want to know that devices that are connected to your network are the ones that should be connected to your network. In some cases, the traffic might also be sensitive and you need to encrypt it. But really, we care most about making sure that only the devices on our only the devices we want on our network are actually communicating on our network. So authentication is really important, and we're using standard technology to do that. Another thing that's really important for us in the BACnet committee, and is one of the reasons why it took us 10 years to get to this point, is that we want to maintain compatibility with existing installations. What does this really mean? BACnet SC is different from the other BACnet technologies for moving messages around. So, by definition, if you connect a BACnet SC network to an existing system, you need some mechanism for communicating between the new stuff and the old stuff. And in particular, between BACnet SC devices and BACnet IP, BACnet MSTP, maybe even ArcNet devices. And routers are going to be needed to do that. We really can't get away from that. Of course, over time, many of the BACnet IP devices we expect will be upgraded to BACnet SC. But until then, you're going to need routers in order to enable communication between the new stuff and the old stuff. Another important feature of BACnet SC is that it supports IPv6 as well as IPv4. Now, sorry for the technical jargon here. Most of us are used to using IPv4, although secretly, maybe not so secretly, the telecommunications providers are rolling out IPv6 in their networks. My cell phone might be using IPv6. In fact, in certain parts of the world, IPv6 is the norm. And one of the advantages of the design that we have for BACnet SC is that it will work just as well on IPv6 networks as well on IPv4. Although we expect that almost all the early deployments will be on IPv4 networks. Okay. All right, I'm going to repeat Jim Lee's slide in which he showed various security categories. And you'll see, if you can see in the back there, there are two check marks One is next to authentication of devices, and the other is next to encryption. So, really, that was our goal in BACnet SC, is to address those 2 points. But you'll see a lot of areas in which there are no check marks. Those are places where BACnet SC does not provide any solution, and probably won't for a while, or maybe ever. So this problem of securing these systems is much, much bigger than BACnet SC or anything that the BACnet committee is likely to ever do. Next slide, please. So let's talk about deployment a little bit. Deployment of BACnet SC systems will be different than BACnet IP, even though they're sharing the same TCP/IP infrastructure. For example, we're going to get rid of BBMDs, and instead we have this concept of a hub, which performs some of the same functions of a BBMD, but in a very different way. First of all, hubs are centralized, whereas BBMDs were decentralized in a typical system. And there are only 1 or 2 of them in any BACnet SC network. Whereas in a large BACnet IP network, you could have tens of BBMDs, or in a really, really big system, even hundreds. We hope that having 1 or 2 will make it easier to manage than having many BBMDs. And we worked really hard to try to make it possible to deploy these systems in a fairly straightforward way. Time will tell, of course, how successful we have been. Another thing that's really important about BACnet SC, which differentiates it from BACnet IP, is that every device will have a unique certificate, which performs 2 functions. First of all, it's a secure way of identifying the device from an IT standpoint. And second of all, it will allow you to kick that device off of your network sometime if you decide, for example, that the particular device has been stolen or compromised. In order to make all this work and to make sure that only devices that the building owner has authorized to be on their network will actually be on their network, we use a certificate authority that's specific to a site to sign all of these device certificates. Now, this is a little bit too technical for this audience, I think, but I'd be happy to talk to you about how this works afterwards. Finally, I want to emphasize that BACnet SC is a tool, and you can combine it with your existing tools for trying to secure your BACnet network, such as VLANs and VPNs. BACnet SC will add security in those cases. And it might even be deployed, in some cases, on what you would consider to be unsecured networks. For example, public networks. One of the possibilities that people have considered on the BACnet committee is that 1 or more of the 2 hubs, one of the hubs, for example, the primary hub in a BACnet SC network, might be in the cloud, and you might communicate with it over the public internet. I don't know whether this will actually come to pass, but BACnet SC is designed to have sufficient security so that at least we can consider that as an option, whereas you should never do that with BACnet IP. Okay, next slide, please. Timeline. You might have noticed that the title of my talk was Anticipating BACnet SC. All the great things about BACnet SC. BACnet SC is not an official part of the BACnet standard yet. We've been working on it for a while. We've done 2 public reviews. We've done plug fests, or as BACnet International would like to call them, Secure Connect interoperability test sessions. I like plug test better. And we're headed towards a third public review and a third plug fest this year. And depending on the outcome of the plug fest and the public review, we might have an official standard before the end of this year. I'm certainly hopeful. I think 10 years is enough for this process. We need solutions. We need tools that you can deploy on jobs as soon as possible. Finally, I want to acknowledge all the companies and people who contributed to this effort. We've had many companies in the building automation industry who've contributed time from their experts to put this together, as well as Cisco Systems, who was an early participant in this process. Now, I've talked about BACnet SC, but it's not the only game in town as far as automation systems are concerned. UL is in this now. They have a standard called 2900 that is trying to address some part of the cybersecurity problem. And they're actively marketing their services to the building automation industry. ISA Secure comes out of the process control industry. And likewise, they're trying to find new markets for their services. I don't know very much about it, but I think Carol is an expert on ISA Secure, so maybe she can answer. All right.
How are you going to answer some questions?
Yeah, Carol will answer your questions about ISA Secure. The TIA is wading into the space. You know, they're more of a telecommunications, you know, Verizon and Comcast kind of association, but they see smart buildings as being an important new thing for them, and they've started a program, and cybersecurity will be some part of their program. So those are three others that I think that you ought to be aware of. I'm not sure that how much we know about any of them, except perhaps what Carol knows about ISA Secure, but I think that these are also tools that we might end up using to make systems more secure in addition to BACnet SC. So with that, I'll conclude and take questions. Thank you.
Yes, good morning. My name is Jan van Raden from Product Mechanical Contractors in Aruba. So my question actually is, what makes the difference in development of the BACnet SC and these days the home automation and IoT? Where is the difference? Why not follow the same path and same security as they do in the IoT and the home automation? Because home automation you can buy on every corner of the street and implement it and it works and nobody cares about it. So what makes the difference between these two?
I would say one difference is that home automation devices are consumer products that you go and buy and plug in, right? You don't actually engineer it, you don't, other than just plugging it in. All building automation systems are engineered specifically for a building. So that the complexity in the process of installing is significantly different.
I almost think you said it yourself.
But
right?
it is the data that we want to secure, right? We don't want to have anybody intruding in our system. So where is that difference between my home where somebody can go into my system and through my system go everywhere else in the world, or you can enter in a building? I mean, in my opinion, there's no much of a difference in there, right? Everybody can hack wherever they want.
I thought your comment about nobody cares is probably appropriate for most homes. Yeah. Most homeowners don't care. They presume it's not a big deal, or they say, you know what, if it's a problem, I'll unplug my router and I'll go back to where I was. But in buildings, we care. Yeah. Because the worst that can happen in a home is about this big. The worst that can happen in a building is really big.
No, but does that mean
it's a different problem?
Does that mean that the home automation is not that secure?
There's lots and lots of articles that say it's not. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
That's probably not the level we want to aim for.
Let me add, though, that although the standards in the home automation space are perhaps not as widely deployed. I think that the direction from a technology standpoint is going to be similar. I didn't mention it specifically. I tried to stay away from the three-letter acronyms in my talk. But TLS is a technology that BACnet-SC is built upon. It's also used when you connect to, for example, your bank or your credit card company to do transactions. And my expectation is that in the home automation market, TLS is going to be a foundation there as well. So we're trying to take advantage of the best fundamental technologies that the IT industry has developed in doing BACnet-SC, and I think that home automation will go in more or less the same path.
I also add, comparing the two, a house versus a 40-story office building or even a 5-story, right? It's a little different, right? So if I put the passwords on everything in the home, people will go crazy, right? Because before they can change their thermostat, they have to log in a password. So some of the things are not the same, but I get on the communications, the good example of the banking. Yes, you want to have that HTTPS, TLS, 1, 2, 1, 3, when that comes out. And you want to make sure that those kind of systems follow the same standards, and we do. There is a good standardization method for both of those. But as far as putting passwords on thermostats and this and that, when you turn on your ceiling fan, maybe Alexa or whoever you have, in your house, I think that would overwhelm some people. But in a building, going to access a building automation system, we got to have that authentication process, as well as when Carol logs on versus Jim, what can he do, what does he need to do, so that authorization kicks in. So that's a big difference when you compare a home versus like a office building, commercial building.
To Carol's point, at 2:30 today, I'm doing a presentation session that's titled, Alexa Has Left the Building. Because consumer IoT and what we need in building and bringing IoT technology into buildings is really different. Even if the underlying technologies are the same, the deployment model has to be different if we want to get the results we're after.
And would like to add one more thing. When we talk about home automation, those home automation systems are usually driven by all kinds of apps that you get, by all kinds of audio-video companies that hear things in. And usually these systems last in the homes between 3 and 5 years, is at least what I believe. In a building, these things they are usually operational between 20 and 30 years. So it's a completely different scheme in this perspective. So if you don't, home automation users always want to have the latest and greatest, and they go out and buy new things, and then it's a kind of natural process that they keep up to date also on the network security side.
This new implementation of the BACnet-SC standard, is it meant for the device-to-device communications, or is it more meant for device-to-operator workstations through an internet connection?
The standard is intended to be applied in either case. Now, there aren't very many VAV boxes yet that use TCP/IP communication, although we're seeing more and more of the manufacturers introduce products down to the terminal level which use TCP/IP. So I think that over time you will find that BACnet-SC is applied all the way down to the terminal level. But for now, there will be a lot of MSTP devices out there in the world.
Okay, so it's not for MSTP, it's only for IP devices.
That's correct.
Okay. And just a kind of another question here. Is there any plans downstream to come up with another network besides MSTP and IP that may span a longer distance, like an optical network link?
People run TCP/IP on optical network links today, so I think that there's no obvious impediment to running BACnet-SC over
SCs that you can use any kind of IP infrastructure. I think that's the big plus.
Any other questions from the floor?
I'm a technology analyst, by the way, for a company called Berg Insight. So in terms of motivation for whatever we're talking about, BACnet, SC, and so on, there's all of 5.8 to about 6 million commercial buildings in the US. I don't think of that as a big, huge market, if you compare with the 1.5 billion unit smartphones or 100 million unit automobiles and so on. Then you take the 5.6 million divided by, 20 to 50 vendors, let's say, depending on size. It's not a huge market from my point of view. Then, the second thing is, more than 90% of those buildings are less than 10,000 square feet, maybe 5,000 square feet. There's only about 1% that's more than 100,000 square feet. So taking off, I think a lady asked a question about, adding on 10% to the IT budget, but the IT budget is not that big for a 5,000, 10,000 square foot building. So this is my main question. What is the motivation? Is the market big enough for vendors to go hard and fast after things like SC?
That's a great question.
I think I'll take it. I think now that we'll have the BACnet SC, the manufacturers will start building controllers just to meet that specification, right? So now, even if the controllers systems get applied to a 5-story office building, a flat, 1-story, whatever, shopping mall, they'll still have that embedded, they'll have a protocol that's secure. So now it just depends on, again, their needs and how much more security. But you'll have, when it's implemented, they'll have user accounts that you have to authenticate, the devices will have to authenticate, authorization, what is that user supposed to do? So you'll have to still set that up. So you'll get this kind of baked in anyway. So I think you'll be able to take advantage whether you have this real small building to the big, multi-story building.
So you're basically saying they are going to need a standard set of features anyway.
Yeah, and this
so
is
you're
what
just right on top of that.
Right, it's happened today. So today with BACnet over IT, the manufacturers have implemented that, right? You get a BTL listing. Well, they're doing the other things that both gyms called out, right? They're doing authentication, authorization. They have user accounts, right? All those things are still going to be there, but added, you'll have an improved, more secured BACnet network between devices.
So is this like software upgradable? So when we talk about SC, is that like a software fix, or you have to rip and replace equipment and gateways and all that?
So again, you'll have to, the device you buy, you'll have to be clear on it. Is it a BACnet IT or a BACnet IP device, or sorry, SC device? And then you'll either replace, or as Jim was pointing out, you'll keep a portion of what was installed, and maybe if you got a critical area or you got the funds for just one of your buildings, you'll put SC in that building. And then there'll be a router. So there'll be these interconnection, either you upgrade everything, or you'll decide on which are the critical, where your funding is, and do that section first.
So if they went for the superset right from the start,
yeah.
What is it from a cost add, a price added? Are we talking plus 20% or, because it needs to be where they can see the benefits and the premium is not that high.
I don't think we have an idea, and most likely it'll be absorbed because, everybody's got that same issue, right? All vendors have to change. And so I don't know what the market's going to bear, but,
Let me comment for a second. What you're talking about is actually my business. We have about a 60% market share in protocol stacks worldwide. We've been selling protocol stacks to different OEMs in the controls industry for more than 20 years. And my business is to effectively build that BACnet SC technology into those protocol stacks. And as soon as people license those and upgrade the existing stacks they will have that technology immediately. And to that end, one of the things that we've talked about is there are many parts of the problem that BACnet SC does not solve. So what we're doing right now at Symmetrics is introducing something we call Secure Connect. And that is secured by Symmetrics, which is effectively a series of standards that goes beyond SC, which we will standardize in those same protocol stacks. So we're going to try to solve more of the problem for the industry and the users and put that out into products as quickly as we can. So just to Carol's point, this isn't going to cost very much money to the manufacturers, and I don't think it'll be that material an add. What will be material is all of the other questions that have not been decided around security, which are human factors, security issues. That will be expensive. That will have a long learning curve. And just to your other point, everybody at this table, when we view market sizes, if you look at the Department of Energy Information Agency, CBEX numbers, Commercial Building Energy Consumption Survey, that's where the 5.8 billion buildings comes in. But almost everyone in the industry looks at these things globally. And if you look at the building stock of China, India, the developing world, Southeast Asia, Africa, there are huge markets out there, and in aggregate, it becomes material.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you look at Asia Pacific, there's a whole lot of new construction that's significant. But if you look at Europe, it is a completely retrofit market because they also have a lot of historic buildings. That's why I asked the question of software upgradability and so on.
Other questions?
My name is Todd Gray. I run a little museum in Minnesota. We got about 370,000 square feet. So we just finished an upgrade after 20 years. It took 5 years to do it. And we have about 450 controllers in the building, 9 of which are global controllers. So as we talk about encryption, these controllers really have memory and they have CPU power. And encryption is going to take more CPU power. It'd be very unrealistic for me to think that I'm going to get a budget to every 5 years change a VAV controller. But I don't think it would be unrealistic to think that I change my global controllers, 9 of them, in a large facility, every 5 years to keep up with the encryption needs and the security needs that we have in the future. Cisco would tell you that every 18 months, there's one more bit needed to a key to maintain an unbreakable key and encryption. What are your comments with that thought or that thinking? And that does increase the cost of hardware, but maybe only at the global level. When you get to the VAVs, nobody's got the economics to change them more frequently.
Yeah, I agree with your thought process there. I think if the VAVs are an MSDP, this BACnet over SC initially, is protecting IP devices, right? And I think changing out your building controllers, the supervisory level, taking a look at your workstations, right? What you have as far as that, and then consider at least review what you have on the MSDP bus and see if you're going to change that technology. But you're right, you can do this in steps. And the workstation, the way they communicate, that just might be an upgrade depending on what you have. So it might be an upgrade versus you got to change out the controllers. Again, every vendor is probably have to come out with what makes sense, because what you said there about the resources are very important. Just adding some of these things may push that controller to run out of resources or get kind of close to it. So it depends. I can't give you an easy answer, quick answer.
But I don't think anyone's expecting customers to swap out VAV boxes every 5 years. Even as systems get more secure, we have IP at the VAV level. We don't expect that from our customers. They still expect the same 15, 20, 25 year shelf life from a VAV box. So it's probably going to be a challenge as we implement more security down in the VAV box, but we've got to hit that head on as manufacturers.
Yeah, some of some of the newer technologies, you can do quite a bit of security lay down below, like the little IoT devices and that. They have real Pro CPUs and they're not that expensive. So it'll be coming out more and more where.
So multiple.
Yeah.
Hi, Gary Ovidal. I'm with a very large international utility company, but I'm a skunkworks. I'm implementing DC microgrids. And I very much appreciate this panel. I've learned a lot. You guys are thinking about some very complex issues. And I'm afraid it's going to get more complex because as I implement these microgrids, and every load has its own controller, which is going to determine what energy and packets it gets to its storage devices, etc. It's going to be really, really interesting. As Robert said, defining digital as analog, which I thought was very entertaining. It's going to be a progression over time, and if we look at trends of decentralized control versus what customers seem to want, right above, almost above choice, and they really don't understand the system. And I hear people say, "Well, we're just going to educate the consumer on." People don't even know how electricity works, right? They just want the lights to go on. So how do we do the interoperability between the different levels of systems? And don't we just need do we need to come up with a way to separate the problem and have certain things like the engine? I like the diesel truck, commercial truck analogy. There's the engine's doing its own thing, and it's basically unhackable if designed properly. It does it. The second level, the driver, right? Okay, so I am the driver. I'm going to control this system, but it's only going to take certain inputs and allow certain inputs from me, right? And then there's the third level, the Google Maps, where I'm going to go and taking in weather data, things like that, and then controlling the interfaces between those. And I really see a convergence of that in decentralized controls coming that we're going to have to figure out, because each of our controllers is kind of like game theory. They each have their own selfish interests, but then they're aware of the common goals and can help out with respect to certain goals. And how do we deal with the networks of especially legacy buildings in a situation where we're going to overlay we're not going to go decentralized, that's anarchy, right? But it's going to go from centralized to distributed, and then eventually the goal is decentralized. How do we mesh that in as we come in from the top end with energy systems and from the bottom end with what you guys are talking about? It's fascinating, by the way. Thank you.
Jim, could you give us a word on the utility smart grid information model, -rate 201P?
Okay, I'm going to advertise a project that we did within the ASHRAE, which is called 201P, in which we developed a facility smart grid data model. Now, a data model is not a protocol. It's just a way of thinking about the data that you need when a facility and utilities might want to exchange some data for some purpose. So I would encourage those of you who are interested in issues related to the future of how facilities and the utility grids, whether they be microgrids or much larger grids, will communicate with each other, to at least take a look at what we've done in that project.
Yep, go ahead.
I was just going to say that Navigant did a report on cybersecurity December, I think it was, and one of the conclusions, I think they came out with some action points and some conclusions. One of the conclusions was layered approach to cybersecurity, which is really what you're talking about. So the systems are fundamentally layered, so cybersecurity, the way we approach it, should also be layered. And I think that's the way it is in IT.
Right. So on the same, right. The BACnet SC, they have the stack. It's 4 layers, and it's a little different. but still it's available, and so if someone wanted to integrate to understand at a protocol level, you could do that. And the good thing is we're using standards, right? Standard TLS, and Jim could go deeper, but that will buy you some to see the stack, to see the communications, the rules, and so that you've got a better chance of integrating properly, properly with other SIP systems when you know that it's a standard and it's published and so forth. And in fact, one of the benefits with our existing BACnet groups at all is you can ask for an interpretation. So if you're trying to implement something, integrate, that's not even on our map, you can get the other developers or whoever the interested parties in to read the specification and to actually come to a meeting or write in questions and interpretations if there's any question about the protocol. I think Jim is going to add more about that, right? The stack.
Yeah, everything that we do within ASHRAE is open. The openness has a cost. It takes us a long time to go through the necessary process, but the specification can be purchased by anyone. And if you'd like to make a comment, anyone can do that. After the standard is published, you can request an interpretation. You can even make your own proposals for us to consider in terms of changes to the standard. So it's a good process for achieving multi-vendor interoperability, but there's a cost to the process, and you might as well take advantage of the benefits.
Kind of going back to the example of the diesel truck, it's interesting and how you have the engine, driver, and the navigation. If you think about that industry, what that industry is starting to go through is another revolution of autonomous driving. And I think if you talk to people in that industry, where it's at right now is that it's not about technology. They can do it tomorrow. It's social, right? And I think that's, so that, this industry is going to go through a big part of that as well. It already has, it already is. It will continue to do so. And it's been mentioned here a few times already that it's a little bit social. A lot of it's procurement. It's how we go and procure buildings and building technologies within them, how we run them, who's the stakeholders. It's not really about the technology. It is very a social thing that we have to overcome. So there's a lot of synergies between the two.
So I have a question. We all know the problem that a lot of systems have user passwords and everybody just says admin 1, 2, 3, 4. So you create a system with security and people don't use it, right? So it's a question about BACnet SC. Is there a way for people not to use SC, even though the product itself is SC compliant? Is that prohibited, or is that?
Well, I think most vendors right now are waiting for the addendum to be finalized, right, and approved, and then they're building to that because we believe that's what the market wants. They want a protected network, secured network. That's what we hear from our building facility managers. That's what we hear from IT guys. So the vendors are going to switch over to BACnet over at SC. Now, if you want to keep your other protocol, your BACnet over IP, that is the current protocol. I think you may have a hard time buying new controllers or updates for that. I don't have a crystal ball, but I believe there's enough market and drive to get the vendors to build BACnet over SC. Now, you will have a lot of systems where you've got to buy that router or have a router because you don't have the monies to just go and update all of your buildings. I haven't seen it ever where somebody just flips the switch, gets all the money they want, and goes and upgrades. So I think for some time we're going to have a mix, but definitely vendors, I think, their mindset is to switch to BACnet SC as soon as possible.
Humans are always the issue with making things unsecure, because we can make a really secure system and then I email you my password. Right. It's a very dumb thing to do. But
So the question is, does BACnet SC force it to be secure, or can I take a product that has BACnet SC and use it in a way that's not SC?
Okay, so Jim, you can help me out, but when it's, most vendors are gonna make a building controller or application-specific controller, it's gonna do its function, and that underlying communications is gonna happen with BACnet over SC. There might be some applications where they don't wanna use it, but I can't think of one. But on the other hand, remember the checklist that both Jims brought up on the board, and that is, when it comes to user accounts, that authentication piece, that's not part right now of the BACnet spec, okay? So that, you're gonna rely on the vendor. So you'll have authentication. Now, in some vendors' products, they have blocked passwords, so you can't put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 4, 6, 8. There's minimum requirements. So again, if that's important, which it should be, that's the keys to your kingdom, right? You should be worried about, or concerned about who's logging in, what kind of strong passwords are you using. So that's not really a part of SC, but it may come along in future standards. We'll have to see.
Is it still going to be passwords though? Are we not going to migrate towards biometrics, which many markets are going towards, you know, the whole facial identification, fingerprint?
I think there's some issues with biometrics. For example, if I have the two-factor, and the first factor being a username and password, second factor what I have, okay, or you want to go biometric, what I have, what I am, the thumb, right? And if I cut my thumb accidentally, I may not be able to log in. So maybe I'll have to go to the facility guy and tell him, hey, I cut my thumb, it's not reading, it's going to take 4 weeks for that to heal. I might have to go back to a single factor. Or if the system could handle another factor, maybe there's a pin that will come to my phone, I can get in that way with the second factor. So it just depends.
But the BACnet SC inherently has nothing
to do with that.
That's at a different list layer level.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's time to move on to the last section of this discussion. Andy, you're up.
So improving cybersecurity being an industry imperative just seems kind of self-evident to me. And that raises a little flag in my mind from an experience I had back in 1989. Those of you from the West Coast probably remember that as the year of the last big earthquake. I lived in Michigan at the time, but I went to California on an earthquake relief team, and I had a couple assignments, and one of them was to go to a food distribution center, a relief center, and organize it. So I went there the first day and just watched so I'd understand what they were trying to do. And it turns out all these trucks come in the morning, they drop off big boxes of things, like boxes of a vegetable, or boxes of a starch, or boxes of a fruit. And the goal was at noon, when people came to get food they needed for the day, they'd get a paper bag with some of each. And that would make for a day's distribution. So there were probably 30 or 40 volunteers, and they'd each go grab a paper bag, and they'd go to all the boxes, they'd grab some stuff, they'd put it in there, and it was like chaos. But at 11:59, people started coming, and bags started going out the door, and it kind of worked. And being a young engineer, I looked at that and said, we could do this better, right? This is easy. Why don't we instead organize things so some people take things off the truck and they put them over here, and then people carry things from here to there, and we'll organize it kind of like an assembly line, and we'll get done much faster. And indeed, the next day we did that, and it got done in an hour instead of 4. And at the end of the hour, the 40 volunteers invited me to leave, and please don't come back. So I had a conversation. What's the problem here? Didn't we make this better? What did I do wrong? And it turns out that they were, as volunteers, interested in making sure it got done, but they were even more interested in making sure they had a chance to talk to each other. That running around chaos included a lot of interaction that was important to them, although it yielded nothing to the goal that I saw of, let's get this job done. So one of the things I learned in that is that goal alignment up front is really, really important. And if we're going to make cybersecurity progress, making sure we have goal alignment among the players is one of those things that's going to be a key element to success, that first one, right? Certainly accelerating evolution to more secure systems, hopefully everyone will buy into that. I would imagine an effective and smooth evolution, people will buy that because market disruptions are not helpful to most people. But that might not be enough. Some things I heard here today are we have to do it and not lose openness.
Well, that's important, and that's not implied in the first two. Maybe the IT guys would like to say, well, in the process to more security, you can't take a little step backwards in our IT level security as you move towards something better. So maybe that's a requirement from somebody. So having goal alignment among all the players is critical, I think, to getting where we want to go. A second thing is to recognize that we have different players and their needs are different, and if we're going to communicate the right message to them, the messages have to be different. When I wrote the slide the other day, I put audience identification and clarification. And as a marketing guy, that's probably the right way to put it. But if we really want to have collaboration, it's not about audiences, it's about communities. So we have to recognize our different communities and figure out how to communicate with them effectively. Two of the obvious ones are suppliers, which need one set of information, and then owner-operators and their agents, which need a different set because they have a different challenge. There are suppliers that have to implement technology, owner-operators and their agents have to deploy it and operate it. And the problems of those two things are not quite the same. On the other hand, they do have to have a collective timeline because the suppliers have to be done with their part before owner-operators and their agents can really start doing the technical part of implementing systems that take advantage of those technological changes. So these things have to have a common collective timeline somehow if we're going to be successful in doing this. It also seems like it's going to be hard to get all these people in a big room, even at AHR. Right? We're not going to get the 50,000 people who need to know this in a room. But there are organizations that touch an awful lot of them. So figuring out what those organizations are and how to use them to effectively reach the people that they have connections with is going to be an important part if we want to be successful. We can't just do a press release. We can't just write a magazine article. As much as those are necessary, they're not nearly sufficient. And last but not least of the success elements I put out here that I think is critical is this open minds and respect for experience. This is another one that I think is everyone would say sure, but in fact, as I think back about how I've done things over the years, maybe it's not so obvious. Way back when I was still young and had some clarity about what I knew, and hadn't yet learned that what I don't know, I actually don't know. I made my first visit to Sedona, Arizona. Sedona's a great place. And I went there for a couple of reasons. But one of them was I was told fabulous sunrises, and I'm thinking, well, great. I have to go down that way anyway. I'll stay a couple days at this little hotel, and I'll experience this. So I came into the hotel one afternoon and was going to check in, and there's this guy sitting on the front porch at a rocker, because it's a Western hotel. You can have rockers on the front porch, apparently. This was an older guy. He's kind of taciturn, if that's the right word, maybe. Kind of maybe a retired cowboy type, and he gives me kind of a look. And I say hi, hello, why not? I told him I was going to just get up early and see the sunrise the next day. And he's like, well, it's actually great. Sunrises here are really good. So when that happens, just come out here to sit on the deck here, and you'll see it. It's great. And I'm thinking, okay, that's good. Except that later in my room, I was looking at it and said, this hotel is oriented east-west. And that front porch, it points to the west. The sunrise is in the east. Even I know that. So I get up the next morning and I go around the back of the hotel and I sit down and I watch the sunrise. And indeed, as the sun starts to get closer, the sky gets lighter. I'm expecting this great thing to happen. And then the sun pops over the edge of the valley. And indeed, the entire valley slope goes from being kind of dark to kind of light. And I'm thinking, well, that was interesting, but it was hardly exceptional. What's the deal? So I hung around for a day and did whatever I was going to do, and the guy was sitting on the porch again the next day. And I said, well, I watched the sunrise. It didn't seem that great to me. So he gave me that look again, right? He said, did you sit out here? I'm like, no, I went over and sat where the sun rises. He's like, well, dude, I told you, sit here. Okay. Next morning I got up early again, and this time I sat on the western side, not the eastern side of the hotel. And all of a sudden I watched the sun come up, and I'm looking at the valley wall, and the very top of the valley wall turns brilliant reds and orange. And over the course of 10 minutes, it creeps down the wall, and there's more and more of these brilliant layers coming to light. And I'm thinking, this is brilliant, this is a great sunrise, but it's not in the east. There's something wrong with this. Sunrise is supposed to be in the east. because I know it is. And what actually happens, of course, is that in the east, the light catches the entire edge of the valley at the same time. But on the west, it actually creeps its way down the valley wall. So it is a much more brilliant sunrise when you look to the west than the east. And this guy knew it. And I listened to him, but I didn't hear him. And if you think about all this conversation we've had about IT, as Jim points out, we've been working in BACnet for IT for 30 years. Well, so has IT been working on security for 30 years, and they did not have the benefit or luxury we've had of obscurity. They've been kind of in the spotlight for targeting and attacks all 30 years. So they actually have learned some things, and some of the things we think we know, perhaps we don't really know. Perhaps they're not really true in a different context. So this idea of working with IT and listening to them is a lot more about hearing them than just listening to them. And respecting what they have to tell us. Because the truth is, for all 30 years, they've had to work with people that do not understand IT. Right? Only IT people understand IT, but they don't just work with us. They have to work with business people in all different divisions and all kinds of purposes, and somehow interact with people that don't do IT. So they actually have experience dealing with people like us. We don't have nearly as much experience at dealing with them. So we need to learn to listen to them and build that into our process. So I talked about the right messages to the right people. We can go to the next slide. Oh, those lines were supposed to come along earlier, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was built. Perfect, thank you. Let's take the suppliers. So what do suppliers need to have? What do we need to communicate effectively? One is this market awareness and this sort of tipping point. As a couple of people pointed out, when Secure Connect is available, and when the cost point is the same, because it will be pretty close, it's just more software. Once it's done, it's done. It'd be hard to find, I think, someone who would say, I could have Secure or I can have not, and I'm going to pick not because I want to be fired when something goes wrong. So all of a sudden, when it's available, it's going to become, why would I not say yes to that question? Because security is such a big deal and everybody knows it. To deliberately choose non-secure, when there's not much of a price difference or no price difference, it's going to be harder for people to do. So the potential for a tipping point in the industry is very fast. Suppliers ought not be left behind in that, and so we should warn them about it. They need to understand the timeline we're expecting. The SC is a year this year. The world expects products the next year, expects deployments the next year. People need to know that. Suppliers need to know that. They need to be trained. BACnet SC is a different beast. They need to understand it and get it right the first time. So we don't go through too many cycles of products that are SC that don't quite get to SC and they have to go back to the development team. And then there has to be best practice, right? Because the SC is the technical part of the problem. You write the protocol this way, but there's this little thing that Jim rightly glossed over called certificates and managing certificates. And that's a new thing in this world, and it's not a trivial thing. The processes for that, suppliers need to understand and be able to execute. Now, owner-operators, they have another set of interesting challenges and communications we need to do there. So let me start with this little video.
Bridges are massively expensive, and most of them are digital.
95% of security breaches, this guy.
Why use the same password for everything? Just go with what you know.
Beware of phishing attacks.
Especially if you're a fish. Click on that. You sound very judgy. Better watch your tone.
At the end of the day, security comes down to who needs to know.
Everyone needs to know.
Not everyone. Don't make information accessible to people who shouldn't have it.
Can't imagine that's gonna sit well.
Shred what you need to shred.
Trash, man. It's garbage by definition.
And make sure you lock your screen when you're away from your computer. She really doesn't need to see this. Sleep mode. They can go night-night.
Do we need to have her here? The way I understood this was kind of about me.
So it's a humorous reminder that while we may say it's a couple of years activity to get technical solutions advanced to the next stage, we need to communicate to the owner-operator and agent communities that doesn't mean they have a couple of years to sit back and wait. That 95%, I think, is pretty well agreed on by most people. The culture of the industry has to change, and IT's been trying to change the culture of company employees for a long time outside of facility management, but it's going to become a facility management role as well to educate their employees to get their culture changed. Because all this technical stuff is not going to do any good at all if people don't actually follow basic protocol that's required for security at the physical and the interaction. Emailing passwords is indeed a bad thing. And it's going to stay a bad thing, back at SC or not. It's going to stay a bad thing. Other things we need to communicate to owner-operators, they need to understand the timeline of what they can be doing now and prepping for what they need to do later, and part of that is also training for them on this idea of best practice for deployment. The deployment of SC is going to work differently than deployment of IP because it has this additional certificate management component to it. And they may not be in site for that. They may indeed not be in the building when that happens. So picking that up and moving it over to their domain is going to be important. And we need to communicate with IT managers, and part of that is supplier communicating with their customers. A part of that is more broad industry education. We need to take that on. And a part of that is going to wind up being case study development as well. So those are things that I think we need to do, messages we need to build and communicate to the right communities to actually move security forward in an organized and relatively rapid way, with the emphasis on relatively. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Wondering maybe just to go through the panel, and because this last part of the summit before we conclude in about 20 minutes or so is what are we going to do about this? What specifically are we going to do after 11 o'clock or next week? So I don't know. You want to start with that, John?
I have to get more drugs to stay awake more, do more. There's a lot more things to do, but what he's talking about is it really has to be a cultural change, I think, in a lot of companies, ours included, and that's one of my jobs for this year is to really get what we call what's called a cybersecurity hygiene, where you think about security every moment. Because about at least 80% of successful breaches start with not necessarily a guy in pajamas, but it starts with people. They open up the wrong email, they go to the wrong website, and it's training all your employees to be aware and cognizant of that, and to keep on training them with that, and have the security as a forefront. So you have to go much further beyond just having having a checkbox and having devices that meet some sort of certification or meet some sort of policy. It's really the people, and the fact that the big companies still get hacked, and that talks to the reason why they're getting hacked is because of the people, and we need to really educate everybody on those lines.
So do you currently have cybersecurity training for your channel? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, well, that's what we're focusing on this year with GDPR coming out, or already has come out, and the U.S. versions of that. California came out with one, and that the regulatory and the government's going to force our to step up to the plate, force our maturity in this. So right now we've been training more of our engineers and our IT, and then we're going to do our own people. Okay. That's the whole company.
Yeah, very similar. Two big efforts was to educate people within and outside our customers, have lunch and learns about BACnet over BACnet Secure, what's coming. And then the other thing is to continually educate people on cybersecurity, customers as well as our sales guys, and internal, external. We have a lot of processes in place, very excited to say, and what we need to get to is more customers and again, give them the right size cybersecurity that they need and don't overwhelm them. Because I figure if you give them too much, they're just not gonna understand it, they're gonna get lost. And, so, right size the delivery of cybersecurity and training for what they need. And be very upfront when you understand that and you want more, we can give you more.
I think a big push for us as manufacturers this year should be that we make this mandatory. This should not be optional. We kind of need to hold the line to that. And there's certainly this isn't like a regulatory compliance. It's not a health and safety issue. So we have to step up and make this ourselves. We have to draw the line in the sand and say, now this is the standard. This is the way we're going to implement. And as we do that as manufacturers, that then trickles down all the way through the contracting chain, all the way down to the end user, and they get to see the benefit of that. But we need to hold our feet to the fire and make sure that it is absolutely mandatory. It's what we do by default. It's not an option. You're always going to get it. That's the only way to invoke that cultural change.
Great. So Symmetrics, from a technology base and an OEM supplier of technology, we have to be a very early mover because we're effectively providing that technology to many of the OEMs in the business. So throughout the course of 2019, we're going to be introducing this program that we call Secured by Symmetrics, where our protocol stack customers will, as soon as the standard is released, we will have a variant of the protocol stack which is ready to deploy in their products. And we will work with our friends, competitors, to fill some of these other voids that exist in the security standard so that we can standardize those and bring those to market straight away.
From the back-end committee perspective, I think that there are a lot of ways that we need to communicate with the developers of products to help them to avoid some of the pitfalls that we foresee. BACnet is intended to enhance interoperability. And we need to make sure that with BACnet SC, we don't lose track of that. Security, getting it right, having products that will actually interoperate with each other and still be secure is a non-trivial thing to do. And those of us in the committee have a pretty good idea of how to do it, but there's a much bigger world out there of people who want to produce products that support BACnet SC, and we need to make sure that we provide them with technical resources so that they can make good decisions.
Great.
I think the technical part of this problem has been talked about a lot, and effectively some of the social problems in the context of culture of an organization. A piece that I think still needs to be thought through, and maybe it's bigger than we think, is the ability of reaching out and educating all of the chain of deployment from these products, because I think the deployment process will be different enough and require some skills and knowledge that's different enough that people are going to need to have a way to figure out how am I supposed to do this, or we'll create a bottleneck in deployment that is really not helpful to getting where we want to go.
When I pick up what Andy said, I think most important for us will be in the future to create awareness and acceptance that during the deployment process, but also during the maintenance process, things become more complicated. They'll be more time consuming, and in the end, will cost more money. So if we wanna make sure that we have secure systems out there, we need to accept that this is also including a certain investment, not only on the manufacturer side, but specifically on the deployment side.
Any of you have specific thoughts about what you're going to do? No?
Thank you all once again. And, as a person that's very new in the field, I'm so happy that my professor recommended that I come and attend this summit. So for myself, what I plan to do is educate myself more on how to be a contributor to this challenge. And that's a question to you as a panel, or myself as a new person in the field, or perhaps some of the other attendees who are interested in learning more on how they can contribute. What pathway would you recommend that I focus on in order to become more dedicated, to be more effective, so that my blows don't strike here?
It's a great question.
You should take it.
I'm not sure. I think being involved. I think driving things. One of the things that I think about often, unfortunately, is that a lot of the expertise and know-how in this industry are contained in grey heads, brains. Right? What's the average age up here?
Yeah, I'm getting old.
So, so I think the fresh young blood is great, absolutely great, and maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe we don't know what the answer is. Maybe it's the next generation that's actually going to drive whatever needs to be done. Yeah.
And if I might add, it won't hurt you to understand a little bit about networking, because there'll be different topologies. We're going to do hub and spoke. Understand some of these protocol, these acronyms, and then understand the fundamentals of cybersecurity, and you can get that training off the web or contract with someone. But I think those are kind of the basic principles. And then the vendors and products and standards committees will reinforce those, that, these are networking things, there's a stack. Don't have to worry about that unless you're doing development and so on. But if you're doing installations, these things come in mind. So I think that's where you have to, don't try to understand everything, but focus on the area. So it depends where you're going, and then bite off what you need.
The other thing I'd say is, going back to Andy's point earlier about the IT industry's been doing this for years. As you meet people and talk to people, friends, family, people that you meet, they're in different industries, and they have different ways of doing things, different ways of servicing things, different IT models, infrastructure, technology. Learn from that and bring some of that into this space, because we need that every now and then. It would be good for us.
Maybe a little bit more concrete as well. There's a deliberate effort to provide information and education to people in the field, both new and existing people, at the BACnet Institute. So there's a BACnetinstitute.com is a portal for all kinds of things, and there will at some point, hopefully soon, be an IT-specific course there. There are already a couple of courses there on facility management and open systems and related stuff.
Yeah, there's we mentioned too, the government's really stepped up to the plate. So Department of Homeland Security, the FBI has a thing called InfraGuard that you can get information from. It's a daily blog kind of thing, and then industrial control systems. There's a nice introduction there on IT and OT security, and you can teach IT people about OT security just by that. So there's a lot of good stuff on the web. Just don't sleep. Just keep reading.
So we have another question, Tom?
Just maybe a comment. The building owner is the one really ultimately at risk, and the one with the pocketbook, and they don't understand any of this. So we're going to have to, our goal is going to have to be to simplify the decision making and the criteria, or they're going to just wave big wand, and contractors and vendors are going to be in or out, notwithstanding all the details. So simplifying the metrics for them.
Okay. So we're coming up to our 10:30.
We have one more question.
Sorry, you had a question? Sorry, I didn't see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just heard Andy say one thing and Robert say another, so
that happens.
It does. I heard Robert say that it's not a legal or a public safety issue, but Andy said that it was. And I'm aware of like NIST, SP 800, there's the legal requirements of all these companies that are being hacked and what's happening to them. So I do see it as a legal and a public safety requirement. And in our ethics statements, as engineers, we agree that we're going to defend public safety. And a building that does not operate is not safe. So do we agree that it's a legal and a public safety requirement for cybersecurity to go into buildings?
Well, I'm not aware of any legal requirement right now for buildings to put cybersecurity in building control products. That's what I meant. I don't think there is a legal requirement right now.
I'm not aware of it.
Maybe it should be.
We believe, I think the panel sitting here is 100% behind the belief that there should be. And often that cultural, social change that I mentioned drives that regulation, right, that we need it.
And I will say that depending on the industry, say if I was a hospital taking in Medicare patients and all this other type of services I provide to people, and my BAS system gets hacked and my billing system gets hacked, say the whole thing gets hacked. There are legal requirements for them to come clean with the authorities saying, you know, Medicare system got hacked and compromised, and patient information, HIPAA, and all those things come in. Those are the legal things, but right now I'm not aware of anyone who has a 5-story office building, they got hacked, that they have to publicly announce that they've been hacked and provide some details. If you're trading and things like that, banking rules might come into play, but I'm not aware of just your building system and your reporting. And now I'm not up on every state law, so, but I've never heard it.
Yeah, that's part of the problem in the United States. You got different laws for each state and that. But again, with the European Union GDPR regulation from this past year, and you're going to see more and more regulations come out at the state level and maybe even at the federal level sooner rather than later, probably. One thing I think about is like California's law, where if you manufacture a network device and you sell it in California, you cannot have a default password. You have to force the people to actually put a password in there. And that's a small thing, but it's going to keep blossoming from here.
Okay, so sort of a last point, I think, before we wrap up. This is obviously the first time that we've had this cybersecurity summit or a meeting like this. There's obviously been lots of other technical meetings and education meetings. Just sort of wondering from the panel and also from the audience, where should we take this? Should we continue to do this? How, what format, size, audience, these kinds of things? Any thoughts?
Opening up a little bit more, do you think the name AHR is valuable anymore? Because we're talking about the digitalization of our whole industry. I think about AHR is still, technicians, tuning up HVAC systems and so on. I think part of the education is also what are you portraying to the world? What is this conference about? So I think it really needs to indicate. We said about 10% of the room are IT people. Why is that? Because AHR doesn't bring the whole swath of IT people in. So I think we need to go a little bit higher and say, starting from what is this conference going to be named and how it's going to be marketed. And then I think out of that will flow out much more naturally topics such as cybersecurity.
Okay, great point.
So should we be presenting at BOMA or IFMA? Because that's where the other people that are a part of this, right? Do you feel we should take this same panel and go and see these other bodies, the community, right?
I know the industry, but I found this very, very valuable. Like a couple of people shared. It's a very nice panel. Though I thought I knew all the topics, it's nice to have, what 8 people's point of view. And I think so. I think it's becoming more and more important.
But I think one of the things you're saying, sir, I can't look at you and speak at the same time, is
maybe we should take it to an IT forum.
I think so. I mean, the
Event like Interrupt, for example.
Yeah. I mean, it's still, we are talking about the two verticals coming together from a holy grail point of view, but really not from a practical point of view. The practical point of view is what you all are talking about. Take it to the forums where the IT people congregate. The day might come 5 to 10 years from now, the IT folks will just come here because they know the topics, because you hit them in their, sweet spot conferences. Yeah, so yeah, the answer is yes, you should be at those conferences.
Okay, sorry.
I don't know the ISA 112, but how are you guys addressing OPC UA certificate server or model and bridging that scene kind of goes together, because they're going to operate kind of that steel there, and very much pharma, large universities, we're deploying those now. And so that's part of our work group in that enterprise model we're doing, and it might want to hook you guys together now, because that's addressed at the OPC UA layer already.
Jim?
Let's talk.
Yeah.
One other quick thought on that is with the forums, the risk management and
Risk management and insurance is another angle, because at BOMA, we all know even smart buildings just doesn't resonate. Cybersecurity, that's interesting, but not my problem. So you go right to a risk manager or an insurance. We've had these conversations, and their eyes get about this big when they realize it's not even in the conversation, much less maybe even insured.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you. Any other comments from the panel? Otherwise, sorry?
It may be cross-industry. Go talk to IES and so lighting and transport systems, the other vertical systems in the building, and pull them together and then talk to IT as a consortium.
Or even maybe beyond technical, like building owners, go to them, and they've been asking, where are you guys at with those things? And then they could start bringing it from their whenever they start projects, and then put it into the standards, into the contracts, and that.
Especially with message.
Okay. Jim, do you want to declare this summit?
Well, first I'd like to thank everyone for sitting here for 3 hours. What a group of diehards. I really appreciate it. And I'd really like to thank the panelists for coming and making an effort to get the views out there. Also, thanks very much for arranging this, Anto. So thank you.
All right.
Please feel free to stay around for networking. We have the room for another half an hour.
Until 11 o'clock, so
11 o'clock.
about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
We're here.